Junho sat down. The straw mat creaked beneath his back. The room was tiny. The walls were made of cracked clay. In the corner stood a low table with papers and a seal on a red cord. He read the characters on the seal. Magistrate of Heian County, Sogyeong Province. The 3rd year of Emperor Munsong's reign. The year of Kyong-in. The 3rd year of the drought. He knew this. He knew it as clearly as his own name. Only the name was foreign. Lee Junho, the son of a lowly clerk from the backwoods, who had failed the exams 3 times and passed on the 4th try, assigned to a county that everyone considered a grave. There was silence in his head. Not empty, dense, as if someone had turned off all the sounds of the world and left only a single thought. He remembered the highway, empty, at night, his hands on the steering wheel, his eyelids closing for a second. A crash, a flash, and that was it. He hadn't had time to send his sister money for her classes. That was his last thought before the darkness. And now he was sitting on a straw mat, and the old man was handing him a scroll bearing the governor's red wax seal, a mandate to govern the district. 40,000 people beyond the mountains in the midst of a 3-year drought. An empty treasury, burnt tax records, a predecessor who had hanged himself, 3 assistants dividing up what was left. Junho unrolled the scroll and froze. Over the text he saw something else. Thin bluish lines, like a grid in a spreadsheet. Like the grid lines in a program someone had forgotten to turn off. He blinked. The lines didn't disappear. They formed rows and columns. Heian County. Population 41,236. Rice reserves in state granaries 218 sok. Actually 47 sok. The rest is inflated. The level of corruption among government officials is 84%. The expected winter mortality rate under current policies is 11,400 people. 11,400. Junho closed his eyes. He opened them again. The numbers hadn't changed. The old man looked at him with a hope he wasn't allowed to have. Junho asked his name. The old man replied that his name was Park Dong-soo, a humble office clerk. Junho heard his own voice and was surprised at how steady it sounded. He asked for all the tax records from the past 3 years to be brought to him, even the ones that had been burned, especially the ones that had been burned.
Park Dong-soo nodded and ran off. Junho was left alone. He looked at his hands, thin, pale, fingers calloused from holding a paintbrush. In his past life, he had shaken hands with deputy mayors and carried folders containing analyses on crisis management. Here, his hands wouldn't even be able to hold a sword. But he didn't need a sword. He needed a chart, that very one, with the blue lines. He looked at the scroll again and saw another line flash in the corner. Park Dong-soo, age 61. Income, 3 coins a month. Debt, 8 coins to Chon's shop. 1 daughter, unmarried, 19 years old. Hidden talent, Imperial-level archivist analyst. Junho slowly rolled up the scroll. He placed it on the table. He stood up. His legs were weak. His head was spinning. But he had already done the math. 47 sok of real rice. 41,000 mouths to feed. Winter in 2 months. If distributed equally, it would last 19 days. If given only to children and the elderly, 36 days. If the stolen grain were found and at least half recovered, it would last 52 days under strict rations and with public kitchens. 52 days isn't winter, but it's a start.
In his previous life, he'd written a strategy for revitalizing a depressed mining district. 120 pages. Charts, models, 5-year forecasts. They'd shelved it and forgotten about it. Here, there were no shelves. Here, there were people who would start dying in 60 days if he didn't do something. He walked out of the room. The county office courtyard was empty, dusty. The tiles were cracked. 2 guards sat by the gate, their faces those of men who hadn't been paid in a long time. A sign with peeling paint hung above the main hall. Heian County Office. Jun-ho looked at the guards and saw the headlines from the Vedomosti. Both were owed 4 months' pay. One had a sick mother. The other had a wife who was 7 months pregnant. Both were thinking of deserting. He walked over to them. They jumped to their feet. He asked when they'd last had a hot meal. They exchanged glances. The one with the sick mother replied, "The day before yesterday." Jun-ho nodded. He said they would eat tonight, both of them, and their families too. The guards looked at him as if he were crazy. He returned to the room. Park Dong-soo was already standing there with an armful of papers. Some were charred at the edges. Others were simply dirty. Jun-ho sat down at the table and began laying out the sheets.
The letter worked. Every sheet he picked up was covered with a blue grid. The actual numbers appeared over the written ones. The discrepancies were staggering. According to the records, 218 sok of government rice were stored in the county granaries. In reality, there were 47. 171 sok had been stolen. The ledger showed where. 60 sok were in Senior Assistant So Yong-il's private granary in the village of Maidong. 43 sok were in the cellars of the John clan's trading house. 31 sok were in 2 secret storerooms belonging to Guard Commander Kwon Tae-soo. The rest was scattered among minor officials and middlemen. Jun-ho was writing it down, with a brush, on paper, like in the Stone Age. But the numbers were precise. More precise than any audit he'd conducted at McKinsey. By noon, he'd finished the first list, 17 lines, names, amounts, the location of the stolen goods. His head ached so badly that spots swam before his eyes. He wiped the blood from his nose with his sleeve. Park Dong-soo gasped and rushed to get some water. Jun-ho sat there staring at his list. In a past life, with a list like this, he would have gone to the prosecutor. There were no prosecutors here. There was only him, a frail 29-year-old clerk with a magistrate's seal that no one took seriously. For 2 days, Jun-ho didn't leave the office. He read. Every document that Park Dong-soo brought was covered with the blue grid of the register and told the true story of Heian County, a history that no one had recorded. The former magistrate, No Guan-hun, was a weak man, but not a wicked one. He had arrived in Heian 4 years ago with a sincere intention to serve. During his first year, 3 assistants explained the rules to him. Jo Yong-il, a protege of the So clan. He controlled the granaries and grain stores. Jong Byung-soo, head of the Merchants Guild and, at the same time, tax assistant, a conflict of interest the size of a province. Kwon Tae-soo, chief of the county guard, 30 men under his command. They all made a living off road tolls. The 3 of them created a system in which every sack of rice passed through 3 pairs of hands, losing a third of its weight at each stop. Magistrate No signed the papers without looking. Then he started drinking. Then he stopped leaving his office. When the drought really struck and the peasants came to the county office to ask for the granaries to be opened, he realized the granaries were empty. A week later, he was found hanging. Jun-ho sat poring over these documents and saw every number, every lie, every signature. The ledger didn't just show him numbers, it revealed connections.
So Young-il took orders from his uncle, So Dae-gyeon, the governor of the entire province of Sogyeong. Grain from Haean was funneled up the chain and turned into gold on the black market in the capital. Haean wasn't the only county that had been robbed. It was one of 12. But Junho forced himself to stop. Not now. His county first. 41,000 first. He spent the second day studying the people. Everyone who came into view got their own entry in the register. The county council cook, 53 years old, a widower, a poor cook but honest. 3 clerks, 2 are useless. The third, Moon So-hyun, 24 years old, quiet, unobtrusive. The Gazette highlighted him as a man with a rare talent for cartography. He drew maps in his spare time. No one knew. Junho committed this to memory. By the evening of the second day, his head ached so badly that he couldn't get up. He had 2 nosebleeds. Park Dong-soo sat beside him and changed the cloths on his forehead. The old man didn't ask any questions. He just sat there. At one point, Junho asked him about his daughter. Park froze. He replied that Yuno was helping out in the archives. She's transcribing documents. A quiet girl. A good girl. Junho said he wanted to talk to her. Tomorrow, after the meeting. Park nodded, but a flash of fear crossed his eyes. Junho understood. In this world, when an official takes an interest in someone's daughter, it can only mean one thing. He said he needed her memory. Not her personally, her memory. Park looked at him strangely. Then he nodded again. At dawn on the third day, Junho got up. His head was still throbbing, but the bleeding had stopped. He washed his face with cold water from a jug. He put on a clean robe he'd found in the former magistrate's chest. The robe was a bit too big, but the seal on the sash was genuine. He took a single sheet of paper with him, a blank one, and another that was already written on. 17 lines. The main hall of the council was small. A wooden floor, low tables, scrolls on the walls with calligraphic admonitions about an official's duty. 3 assistants were already seated.
So Young-il was on the right. A large man, round face, hands folded on his stomach. The expression of a man who'd come to watch a show.
The report showed that his income for the past year was 14 times his salary. 3 concubines, a house in Maedong with a double fence. On the left is Jong Byung-soo, thin, nervous, constantly touches his ear. The Merchants' Guild is under his control. 8 shops are registered under frontmen. He owes the So clan 40 gold coins. He fears So Young-il more than he fears the magistrate. In the center is Kwon Tae-soo, chief of the guard, broad-shouldered, a scar across his left eyebrow. The only one of the 3 who can actually fight. 30 guards, loyal not to clans but to money. The report revealed something else. Kwon hates So Young-il. It's a personal matter. 3 years ago, So took a plot of land from Kwon using a forged document. Kwon swallowed it, but he didn't forget. Junho bowed to the 3 assistants at exactly the angle prescribed by the ritual. Not a degree less, not a degree more. He sat down. He placed a blank sheet of paper in front of him. He began to speak softly. He said he was inexperienced in such matters and asked for their wisdom. He asked them to help him fill out a simple table. On the left were the names of the rice baron. On the right, the official reserves. And in the middle, the actual amount. So Young-il smiled, indulgently. He said that the magistrate must be tired from his journey and was confusing the documents. All the reserves were in place. They could be checked. Junho smiled back. He turned over the written sheet. 17 lines. 3 digits next to So Young-il's name.
60 sok according to the documents, 12 sok in reality, 173 sok in his private granary in the village of Maidong, under the floor of the second shed, buried in clay jugs the night before last. The hall fell silent. So Young-il stopped smiling. His face didn't turn pale, it froze. Jong Byung-soo began to rub his ear more quickly. Kwon Tae-soo didn't move. Only his eyes narrowed and slid to the line with his name. 31 sok in 2 secret storerooms. The addresses were accurate. Jun-ho continued speaking in the same soft voice. He said he had no intention of executing anyone. He needed a functioning county. Anyone who returned everything to the treasury by sunset and signed a voluntary confession would remain in service with a reduced salary. Anyone who tried to flee would be stopped by the men Jun-ho had already stationed on the 3 roads leading out of the city.
Anyone who openly defied him would learn that the young magistrate knew how to submit reports directly to the royal censorate, bypassing the governor. The first report had already been written. It was in the hands of a trusted person. It would be sent by courier if Jun-ho did not return home by evening. There were no people on the roads. There was no report. It was a bluff, as clear as the Arabic numerals Jun-ho used to count with in his past life. He was banking on 3 things. First, So Young-il doesn't know exactly how Jun-ho obtained those figures, and that ignorance is more terrifying than any army. Second, Jong Byung-soo is a coward, and he'll be the first to run, not out of the city, to the magistrate, to turn himself in. Third, Kwon Tae-soo hates So and is waiting for his chance. All he needs is a pretext. Jun-ho gave him that pretext. No one spoke for a minute. Then So Young-il slowly stood up. He said it was slander and that he would file a complaint with the governor. He turned and walked out. Jun-ho made no attempt to stop him. Jong Byung-soo remained seated. His hands were shaking. Kwon Tae-soo looked at Jun-ho for a long time. Then he asked one thing: if he would return all that land. That land. Jun-ho understood. He nodded. Kwon stood up. He said that by noon, 31 sok would be in the treasury. And he left. Jong Byung-soo was the last to remain. He sat there, touching his ear and staring at the sheet of paper with 17 lines on it. Then he asked quietly, How did you find out? Jun-ho replied that heaven sees everything. Jong closed his eyes. He opened them. He said that 43 sok would be ready by evening, and that he was ready to sign anything. Just don't let the magistrate send that report. Jun-ho nodded. By noon, Kwon had driven up the first carts, 31 sok in sacks. Jun-ho stood by the granary and counted. The inventory confirmed it. Every sack was genuine. At sunset, John's carts arrived. 43 sok. John hauled the last sack himself. His robe was soaked with sweat. His hands were shaking, but he kept hauling. Only So Young-il remained. 173 sacks, the largest share. So hadn't returned. He hadn't sent a cart, people, or even a reply. Jun-ho knew that he had gone to Maidong, to his uncle, to his connections, to people who could crush the young magistrate with a single letter to the governor. But Jun-ho knew something else. Kwon Tae-soo hated So. And now Kwon had a reason.
Jun-ho called Kwon over. He said one sentence to him. On the 4th day, Jun-ho met his wife. Han So-yeon stood at the threshold of his study with a tray holding a cup of tea and a rice cake. She was slender, not very tall. Her hair was pulled back into a tight bun. Her face was as calm as porcelain. She bowed at a precise angle and said she had brought breakfast for her husband. The facts unfolded before Junho's eyes. Han So-yeon, 24 years old, daughter of the provincial scholar Han Mun-chil, an impoverished family, an arranged marriage, arranged by Junho's late father, a hidden talent, financial analyst, a knack for quick calculations, a photographic memory for documents. Junho blinked. He reread it. Financial analyst. His wife. The arranged wife he was seeing for the first time in this body. She was a natural-born financial analyst. He picked up his cup. He thanked her. She turned to leave. He stopped her with a question. He asked if she knew how much rice juice cost at the Heian market right now. So-yeon froze. She paused. For a second, something alive flashed in her eyes. She answered, 420 coins, 3 times the usual price, because merchants buy from middlemen, and the middlemen get it from... She fell silent. She lowered her eyes. She said, I'm sorry, sir, I spoke out of turn. Junho said he needed people who knew how to count, not just add numbers together, to truly count, to see where the money is going and where it's coming from. He asked if she'd like to help. So-yeon looked at him. For a long time. There was distrust in her eyes, cautious, learned distrust, like that of someone who'd been deceived so many times that she'd stopped believing in good intentions. She said she'd be happy to help in any way she could. Her voice was steady, but her fingers clenched the edge of her sleeve. Junho noticed this. He didn't press the issue. He said that after lunch he would bring her the tax documents from the previous year and would be grateful if she could review them. So-yeon nodded and left. Junho finished his tea. The tea was good. So she knew more than just how to do the math. That same day he summoned Park's daughter. Yuna came in as timid as a mouse, small, quiet, head bowed. Her hands were folded in front of her. 19 years old. She'd grown up in the administrative office amid scrolls and dust.
The record confirmed what she'd shown earlier, a perfect memory for texts and an ability to organize, an archivist of imperial caliber.
Junho asked her if she remembered the contents of the tax ledgers from recent years. Yuna looked up. She nodded. He asked which ones specifically. She replied, all of them. From the moment she began helping her father. She was 12 then. 7 years. Junho asked her to name the total amount of tax revenue collected in Heian County during the 3rd year of Munson's reign. Yuna answered without hesitation. 3,241 sok of rice and 792 silver coins, according to the records. Junho asked, and in the reality? Yuna fell silent. She looked at her father. Park Dong-soo nodded at her. She said quietly, about 2,400 sok. The rest had been added to the records. She knew that. All this time she had known and kept silent, because who would listen to the daughter of an old office clerk? Junho told her that starting today, she was responsible for reconstructing all the tax records that had been destroyed by fire, from memory, from fragments, and from any sources she could find. Yuna looked at him as if he had just offered her the throne. She said she would try. Her voice trembled, but she straightened her back. On the 5th day, Junho opened the first public kitchen. It was in the building of the former salt office near the market. It had stood empty for 2 years. The roof was leaking. The walls were cracked. He sent 15 of the peasants who had come to the local government office asking for work there. In 2 days, they patched the roof and cleaned out the space. The government cook received his orders and a supply of rice for the first week, 30 sok. The ration was 1 bowl of thin porridge twice a day, only for those who couldn't feed themselves: children, the elderly, widows, the sick. Jun-ho came in person on the first day. He stood at the cauldron. With a ladle, he poured the porridge into bowls. The council's assistants were horrified. The magistrate, with a ladle, standing by the pot, like a mere cook. Kwon Tae-soo stood in the corner, watching with the expression of someone who couldn't understand what was happening but had decided not to interfere for the time being. The peasants approached warily. For the first 10 minutes, no one came forward. Then an old woman with 2 grandchildren took a step forward. She took a bowl. She looked at Jun-ho.
He nodded at her. She sat down. She began to eat. A second person followed her. Then a third.
By evening, 320 people had passed through the kitchen. The register listed each one: age, health status, family, income, 0 for most. Jun-ho memorized the faces. Not all of them, but some. Widow Kim from the 3rd block, 37 years old, 2 sons. Her husband died last year of a fever. Income, 0. Reserves, 0. Expected outcome without assistance: the younger son's death within a month. Jun-ho watched her eat, slowly, saving every single grain. Then she pushed her bowl aside and passed the leftovers to her younger son. He turned away. He clenched the ladle. In his past life, he'd seen numbers like these in reports, percentages, charts, mortality curves. Here the numbers had a face, and that face was eating rice porridge from his hands. On the 6th day, a reply arrived from the governor. Not a letter, a man. A mid-ranking official named Hong Dae-ju. He arrived on horseback with 2 aides. He introduced himself as the inspector of the governor's office for Sogyeong province. He said he had come to inspect the new magistrate's activities following a complaint from assistant So Yong-il. The file opened instantly. Hong Dae-ju, 41 years old, personal secretary to Governor So Dae-gyeon. His income is 6 times his salary. He receives monthly payments from the Seo clan. Assignment: find any pretext to remove Magistrate Lee Jun-ho from office. If that fails, provoke a conflict. Jun-ho read it in a second. He smiled. He invited the inspector into the main hall. He offered him tea. Hong Tae-ju sat down with the look of a man who had come to his execution and was savoring the anticipation. He began asking questions. Why had the magistrate removed the senior assistant without the governor's approval? Why had he opened a public kitchen without budget approval? Why was he personally distributing food, thereby violating the dignity of his office? Jun-ho listened. He nodded. Then he took out a folder. Inside were 2 documents. The first, John Byung-soo's voluntary confession, signed and sealed. A detailed list of stolen items, including amounts and storage locations. The second, Kwon Tae-soo's voluntary confession, just as detailed. Both documents described a system of embezzlement in which senior assistant Seo Yong-il played a key role, and both mentioned that the orders came from above, from the governor's office. On the 7th day, Jun-ho announced the program: Rice for Work. The idea was simple. Every able-bodied adult resident of the county could receive 1 bowl of porridge a day in exchange for 4 hours of work on public projects. Not charity, work. In his previous life, he had studied the public works programs of Roosevelt's New Deal. 3 million unemployed Americans built roads, bridges, and dams for a salary paid by the government. The principle was the same. People don't want handouts. People want to be able to hold their heads high. The first project: an old canal.
It stretched from a mountain stream about 5 li north of the city to the eastern fields. It had been dug 80 years ago. No one had cleaned it in the last 30 years. It had become clogged and overgrown, turning into a ditch of stagnant water. If it is restored, in the spring the water will reach the fields that are currently dry. That's 500 mu of new arable land. 500 mu is enough grain to feed 3,000 people for a year. Second project, the road to the salt works beyond the pass. Currently, salt is transported to Heian via mountain trails. One horse carries 2 sacks. If the road is widened to the width of a cart, a single cart will carry 20 sacks. The price of salt in the city will drop by half. Third project, the city wall. Not for defense, for jobs. Junho knew the wall wasn't necessary, but building a wall means stone, clay, and wood, and hundreds of working hands. It means employment. It means porridge every evening. These are people who won't join gangs. He summoned the scribes, the 3 who remained. Moon So-hyun, that quiet cartographer, and 2 useless ones. He gave the order to announce it in the market and in every neighborhood. Recruitment begins tomorrow. Porridge and work. The scribes left. Moon lingered. Junho asked him if he was drawing maps. Moon turned pale. He thought he was being accused of idleness. He began to make excuses. Junho stopped him. He said he needed a map of the county, a detailed one, showing every village, every road, every stream, every granary, indicating who owns what and what grows where. No such map existed in the Taehua Empire. Officials governed territories they had never seen on paper. Moon looked at him as if Junho had just invented the wheel. Then he asked if he could have a horse for a reconnaissance ride. Junho gave him a horse, and an assistant, and 10 sheets of the finest paper from the administration's supplies. Moon left that very day.
He returned a week later with a draft map that left Junho speechless for a moment. It was a work of art. Every hill, every bend in the river, every trail. Moon hadn't simply drawn a map. He had marked the elevations and depths of the fords as well as the places where rock outcropped. In a past life, this was called topography. Here, it was called a miracle. But that came later. Now it was the 7th day, and Junho stood at the town hall gates watching people gather. The first ones arrived before dawn. By noon, 400 people were standing at the gates. By evening on the first day, 1,200 people were working on the canal. Junho came to the canal in person, not to work, but to watch. The roster listed every worker, age, health, family. He noticed what he had expected. Among the workers were people who shouldn't have been digging. A 63-year-old man with a bad back, a 14-year-old boy with an unhealed wound on his leg, a woman in her 5th month of pregnancy. He called Kwon Tae-soo over. He said they needed a system, 3 categories. First, heavy labor, digging, carrying, hauling. Healthy men aged 16 to 50, full ration of porridge. Second, light labor, sorting stones, preparing meals for the workers, maintaining tools. The elderly, teenagers, and pregnant women. Half the standard ration of porridge. Third, those unable to work. Children under 10, the seriously ill, nursing mothers. Free porridge from the public kitchen. No work. Kwon listened. Then he said that no one had ever done it that way. The magistrate either feeds everyone or feeds no one. Junho replied that this was precisely why thousands died during every famine, because the system doesn't distinguish between those who can work and those who can't, because aid goes to the stronger, not the weaker. Kwon looked at him. He said he understood, and he began dividing people into 3 groups. 3 days later, the system was up and running. 600 people cleared the canal on the first shift and 600 on the second.
Light work took another 3. The community kitchen fed 450 people who were unable to work. Rice consumption, 12 sacks a day. With 431 in stock, that's 36 days. Not enough. Catastrophically insufficient. Jun-ho knew it. He needed another source. On the 9th day, he went to the market. The Heian market was a pitiful sight. 20 stalls. Half of them were closed.
The ones that were open were charging triple the usual price. Rice, salt, fabric, oil. Prices had skyrocketed so much that an ordinary family couldn't even afford salt. Jun-ho walked past the stalls, and the ledger showed him the inner workings of each one. Lee Hanbok's stall, a cloth merchant. Official monthly turnover, 300 coins. Actual revenue, 900. The difference bypasses taxes via a frontman in a neighboring county. The Yun brothers' shop, oil and vinegar. They buy up all the oil within a 3-county radius and control the price. A classic cartel. Kang Hae-jin's shop, a tea house. The only place in the market where the ledger showed no hidden figures. Income equals expenses. Profit is minimal. But the tea house was open. Every day. Even during the famine. Jun-ho stopped by. The tea house was small, clean. It smelled of jasmine and something spicy. Behind the counter stood a 27-year-old woman, tall, straight-backed. Her face was the kind painted on scrolls. But her eyes weren't like those in the scrolls. Her eyes were intelligent, hard and weary. The record unfolded. Kang Hae-jin, 27 years old, a former kisen from the capital. Education, poetry, finance, court etiquette. Reason for departure, refused to switch to a new patron after her former one went bankrupt. Hidden talent, trade, logistics, management. Rank, Minister of Trade. Jun-ho sat down at a table. He ordered tea. Hae-jin served it to him herself. He began the conversation by asking about market prices. She replied briefly, "Prices are insane. The cartels control everything. Honest merchants are going bankrupt." Jun-ho asked what she would do if she could change that. Hae-jin looked at him for a long time. She said she wasn't going to play that game. Magistrates come and go, but the market remains. Jun-ho nodded. He said he understood. He finished his tea. He stood up. Already at the door, he turned around and said one thing, that in a week's time, he intended to appoint a manager for the city market, a person who would set the rules of trade and monitor prices, with the authority of a tax inspector, the right to inspect any stall, and a salary paid from the city treasury, and that he didn't know anyone in Heian who would be better suited for this position, better than the woman who was the only one in the entire market to keep honest books. Hae-jin didn't reply. Jun-ho left. 3 days later, she came to the town hall. She was holding a list. 40 names.
Merchants who needed to be inspected immediately. Next to each name, she had handwritten exactly what they were hiding. Jun-ho checked against the register. 37 matches out of 40. Without any register. Just experience. Just eyes that had been observing people for 30 years and had learned to spot lies. He approved her appointment that very same day. When Kwon Tai-soo heard that a former giseng had become the market manager, he turned pale with rage. He said it was a disgrace, that the merchants wouldn't obey a woman, especially one like her. Jun-ho replied that the merchants would obey the law, and the law would speak through the voice of the one who understood the market best. Kwon left in silence, but by evening, Jun-ho noticed that 4 guards, on Kwon's orders, had taken up positions at the market gates. Not to interfere with Hae-jin, to guard her.
On the 12th day, So-yeon nearly died. The morning began as usual. Jun-ho sat in his office reviewing Hae-jin's report on the initial results of the market inspections. The Yoon brothers, the oil cartel. In 3 days, Hae-jin had found evidence of collusion. 6 shops in 3 counties were buying up all the vegetable oil and reselling it at 5 times the price. She proposed a simple solution. Allow farmers to sell oil directly at the market, bypassing the middlemen. Waive the tax on direct sales for 3 months. The cartel would collapse on its own because its only power lay in its monopoly on the supply chain. Jun-ho agreed. At that moment, Park Dong-soo walked in. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He said that Miss So-yeon had fallen. Jun-ho dropped everything and ran. So-yeon was lying on the kitchen floor. A broken cup lay nearby. Tea had spilled across the stone tiles. Her face was ashen. Her lips were blue. Her breathing was weak. The report flashed up. Han So-yeon. Condition: poisoning. Substance: mercury extract. Dose ingested. Sublethal. Probability of survival with immediate treatment: 82%. Source: tea. Added to the tea leaves no later than last night. Jun-ho dropped to his knees beside her. His hands were shaking. In his mind, his past life was screaming that he needed an ambulance, activated charcoal, and gastric lavage. There was no ambulance, no activated charcoal, and no clean water here. He shouted for Park to bring warm water and salt, lots of salt. Park ran off. Jun-ho lifted So-yeon. He sat her down, leaned her against the wall. She was semi-conscious. Her eyes were open, but she couldn't see. He began to speak to her, quietly and calmly.
He told her she would live, that he wouldn't let her die, that he needed her. Her numbers, her eyes, her arrows in the margins of the documents. He didn't know if she could hear him. Park brought the salt water. Jun-ho made So-yeon drink it. She coughed. She threw up. Good. The more that comes out, the better. He repeated it 3 times. Salt water, vomit, salt water, vomit. The status report was updated. Probability of survival, 91%. The level of poisoning is decreasing. He exhaled. He laid So-yeon on the mat in his office. He covered her with a blanket. She was breathing. Steadily. Deeply. The color was returning to her face. Then he stood up and went to the kitchen. A cup. Tea. Yesterday's brew. The report showed it. The tea was poisoned. Mercury powder was added between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. 4 people had access to the kitchen at that time. The cook, his assistant, the maid, So-yeon, the night watchman at the back gate. Jun-ho looked up each of them in the ledger. The cook, clear. The cook's assistant, clear. The maid, So-yeon. Kim Bo-ra, 22 years old, a hired hand, hired a month ago on a recommendation. Whose recommendation? John Byung-soo. The register revealed more. Kim Bo-ra received 3 silver coins 5 days ago from an unknown source. Contact with an agent of the So clan at the tea shop by the South Gate 2 days ago. The mission? Poison Magistrate Lee Jun-ho. Not his wife. The magistrate. So-yeon was supposed to drink his tea. She switched the cups. By accident. Or maybe not. Jun-ho stood in the kitchen, clenching his fists. His knuckles turned white. In his past life, he would have filed a police report. He would have called a lawyer. He would have turned on the cameras. Here there was no police. There were no cameras. He was there, and there was a maid who had tried to kill him and had nearly killed his wife. He called Kwon Tae-soo. He said 2 words. Kim Bo-ra. Kwon didn't ask a single question. An hour later, Kim Bo-ra was sitting in the basement of the district office.
2 hours later, she told everything. She'd been hired by a man named Bae Son-woo, a small-time merchant, a liaison for the So clan. He'd given her a powder and told her it was a sleeping pill, that the magistrate would simply fall asleep and be taken to the capital. She didn't know it was poison, or so she claimed. The records showed otherwise. She knew, partially. She suspected as much. But 3 silver coins were more than her annual earnings.
Jun-ho stood before her in the basement. A torch on the wall cast shadows.
Kim Bo-ra was crying. She begged for mercy. Jun-ho looked at her and saw the lines from the record. 22 years old, an orphan, raised by an aunt who beat her. She'd gone hungry her whole life. The 3 coins weren't out of greed. The 3 coins were an act of desperation. He left the basement. He told Kwon to keep her infertility, not to harm her, to feed her. He'd deal with it later. Kwon nodded. Then he asked what to do about Pei-son. Jun-ho told him to find her, bring her in, alive. Kwon smirked. He said it would be done. Jun-ho returned to So-yeon. She had already regained consciousness. She was sitting on a mat, pale. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were clear. She asked what had happened. Jun-ho sat down beside her. He told her she'd been poisoned, that the poison was in her tea, that the cup was meant for him, not her. So-yeon remained silent. Then she asked quietly, she had switched the cups at breakfast, because his cup had a crack in it, and she didn't want him to cut himself. A coincidence. The crack in the cup saved his life and nearly killed hers. Jun-ho sat next to her and said nothing. What could he say? That in his world there were metal detectors, toxicology labs, and security services. Here he had a clay room and a wife who had nearly died because of a crack in a cup. So-yeon spoke first. She said she'd finished reviewing the documents from the year before last, that she'd found another 41 discrepancies, that the embezzlement scheme had been going on for at least 6 years, and that she needed the documents from the year before that to trace it back to the beginning. Jun-ho looked at her. She'd nearly died 3 hours ago, and the first thing she says is about documents. He asked how she was feeling. She replied that her head, and that she needed some more tea from a reliable source. He almost laughed. He didn't laugh, but something shifted inside him. A small, heavy stone that had been lying in his chest since day 1. It shifted by a millimeter. That day he made 3 decisions. First, meals for the administration would be prepared only by the chef personally, no assistants in the kitchen. All ingredients would be inspected by the office. Second, So-yeon would receive personal protection, 2 guards around the clock. Kwon would assign the most trustworthy ones.
Third, Jong Byung-soo, that very coward who had signed the confession and returned the 43 sok and whom Jun-ho had kept on duty. His recommendation had brought Kim Bo-ra to the council. The ledger had revealed it. Jong didn't know about the poisoning, but he knew that Bo-ra was connected to the So clan, and he kept quiet, because he was afraid. He feared the So clan more than the magistrate. Jun-ho summoned Jong that evening. Jong arrived, saw the magistrate's face, and understood everything. He fell to his knees. He began swearing that he didn't know, that he hadn't thought about it, that if he'd only guessed. Jun-ho remained silent. He waited for Jong to finish. Then he spoke, quietly. He said he was giving Jong one last chance, just one. There wouldn't be a second one. From that day on, Jong would work for him, for real. Every scrap of information about the So clan,
every rumor, every move. If Junho found out that Jong had concealed even a single fact, the folder containing his confession would be sent to the capital that very same day. Jong nodded, quickly, repeatedly, like a bird. He said he would be loyal, that he would tell everything, that he had something right now. Governor So Dae-gyong sent a letter to the capital, not to the censor's office, to the royal chancellery. The letter contained an accusation of heresy against the new magistrate of Heian, of ties to Mudan shamans, of performing forbidden rituals. This was serious. An accusation of heresy required no evidence. The governor's word and 2 witnesses were enough. Punishment: removal from office, arrest, trial, at best exile, at worst. Junho refused to think about the worst. He let Jong go. He sat down at the table. He thought. The letter had already been sent. It would take a messenger on horseback 10 days to reach the capital. The reply would arrive in 20. He had 20 days to prepare a defense against a charge that could not be refuted by facts, because no one cares about facts when it comes to heresy. He needed someone in the capital, someone who could intercept the letter or discredit it, or counter it with another. On the 13th day, Junho solved the heresy problem, not by force or cunning, with a piece of paper. He remembered one thing from his past life. When you're accused of something you didn't do, the silliest strategy is to try to justify yourself. The smartest is to make the accusation unprofitable for the person who brought it.
Governor Seo Dae-gyong had accused him of heresy, of having ties to Mudan shamans, and of performing forbidden rituals. The accusation was already on its way to the capital via a messenger. A reply would arrive in 20 days, possibly accompanied by an arrest warrant. Junho sat staring at a blank sheet of paper, deep in thought. Then he called for He-jin. She had just returned from the market, smelling of cinnamon and oil. She sat down across from him. He asked if she knew anyone in the capital. He-jin looked at him for a long time. Then she replied that she knew half the capital. She had been a giseng at court for 7 years. Every 3rd official in the royal chancellery drank tea at her table and told her things he wouldn't tell his wife. Junho asked if she knew anyone in the royal censorate. He-jin named 2 people. One was the chief censor, the other was his deputy. Both had visited her tea house in the capital. Both were indebted to her, not for money but for favors, the information she passed on to them about other officials. He-jin didn't just pour tea. She was a hub in the network, and she knew it. Junho took out his report. 12 days in numbers, returned grain, public kitchens, the Rice for Work program, the dismantling of the cartel, the arrest of the poisoner. Every line was backed up by numbers. He asked He-jin to send this report to the senior censor with a personal letter from her, not from the magistrate, from Kang He-jin, with a note stating that the magistrate of Heian was unaware of this letter, that she is writing of her own free will, and that if the censor's office receives an accusation of heresy from the governor of Sodyon, let them first read the attached figures and decide for themselves. He-jin read the report. Slowly. Her expression changed. She looked up and said that this report was impossible, that no magistrate in the empire writes like this. Figures, percentages, ratios, forecasts. This wasn't a bureaucratic report. It was something she'd never seen before. Junho replied that it was simply an honest report. He-jin smirked. She said that honesty in the Tewa Empire was the most dangerous heresy of all. But she would send the letter, that very same day, via her own contact. The messenger left before noon. Now all that was left was to wait. Junho hated waiting. In his past life, he could have checked the letter's status on a mail tracker.
Here the letter was being carried on horseback along mountain roads and might not arrive at all. He shifted his focus to what he could control: the canal. In 2 weeks of work, they'd cleared a third of the channel, 600 meters out of 2,000. The pace was good, but not fast enough. Spring was 4 months away. The canal had to be ready for the first rains, otherwise the water would flow right past the fields. Junho went to the canal and spent 3 hours watching the work. The report highlighted the bottlenecks. The section near the rocky outcrop. The rock was too hard for hose. The workers pounded at it for hours, chafing their hands until they bled. The result was almost negligible. 20 people were spending a day on a task that could be done in an hour, if only. Junho closed his eyes and delved into his memory. A past life. The Institute. A course on the history of engineering. Wedges. Wooden wedges driven into cracks in the rock, filled with water. The water freezes at night and expands. The ice splits the rock. Primitive. But in the Sogyeon Mountains, the temperature drops below freezing at night. The water will freeze. He explained it to the foreman. The foreman looked at him as if he were crazy. Then he shrugged and told his men to give it a try. The next morning, the rock outcrop had been split into 6 pieces. The foreman stood there looking at the rocks, saying nothing. Then he turned to Junho and bowed, deeply, without a word. By evening, news had spread throughout the entire canal. By the next morning, every rocky section had been studded with wooden stakes and flooded with water. The pace of clearing doubled. On the 15th day, Junho met the man he had been waiting for. Bae Son-woo, the liaison for the Seoul clan, the very same man who had hired Kim Bo-ru to carry out the poisoning. Kwon Tae-soo had found him in a village beyond the pass and brought him back alive, just as ordered. Baek Son-woo was short, skinny. He had a rat-like face. His eyes darted about. The records showed 44 years old, a small-time merchant. He owed the Seoul clan 18 coins. He worked for them not out of conviction, but out of debt bondage. He was afraid of everyone. Junho did not interrogate him in the basement. He sat him down in his office, poured him some tea. Bae Son-woo trembled, expecting torture. Junho spoke gently. He said he knew about the debt. He knew Bae hadn't wanted to kill anyone. He knew he'd been forced to do it.
Bae began to cry. He started talking. He told everything. Who had given him the powder, where he received his instructions, who served as the go-between. The trail led to So Yong-il, the one who had fled and was hiding with his uncle, the provincial governor. It was he who had given the order to poison the magistrate. The governor didn't know, or pretended not to know. Junho wrote it all down. Every name, every date, every detail. Then he told Bae that he was writing off his debt, 18 coins from the treasury. Bae stopped crying. He looked at him, not believing it. Junho explained. Debt bondage is a tool. The So clan keeps dozens of people in its grip through debt. If these debts are bought out, the people will have no reason to serve the clan. It's expensive, but cheaper than war. Bae Son-woo walked out of the county office a free man. Junho watched him go and thought, buying out debts. That's an idea. Not just for Bae Son-woo, for everyone. How many people in the county are in debt bondage to the clans? The ledger responded instantly. 347 people. The total amount of debt is 2,600 silver coins. The county treasury currently holds 112 coins. Unrealistic. But what if we set up a mutual aid fund? What if every free peasant contributed 1 coin per season, and from this fund we would buy out the debts of those in bondage? Those whose debts were bought out would also start paying 1 coin each. In 2 seasons, the fund would become self-sustaining. In 4, it would cover all the debts. The principle of microcredit. Muhammad Yunus, Nobel Prize in 2006, a bank for the poor in Bangladesh, only without a bank, without interest, without bureaucracy, just a fund, just shared money, just people who help each other because tomorrow they'll need help themselves. He jotted down the idea, then he put it aside. It was too early. Winter first. Survival first. On the 16th day, Junho faced a problem he couldn't solve with numbers. People were dying, not from hunger, from disease. The cold, dampness, and dirty water were taking their toll. Every day, Park Dong-soo brought a list. 2 names, 3, 5, children, the elderly, those who lacked strength even without hunger, dysentery, fever, pneumonia. There was one doctor in the county, an old man, half-blind. He treated patients with incantations and dried toads. The record showed that his treatment had a 6% success rate.
In other words, out of every 100 patients, 6 recovered on their own, and he attributed this to his toads. Junho needed a doctor, a real one, and he knew where to find him. The records had shown him this on his very first day when he was reviewing the data on the county's residents. Blacksmith Che Do-yun, 38 years old, a blacksmith's shop by the Eastern Gate. He'd been working with iron for 20 years, hands like shovels. A hidden talent. Medicine. Not just medicine, surgery. A blacksmith's hands are accustomed to precision, heat, and delicate work. In another life, in another world, this man would have become a surgeon. Here, he forged horseshoes. But one blacksmith wasn't enough. He needed someone who knew how to teach, someone who knew the theory, someone who could turn a talented blacksmith into a real doctor. He needed So In-hye. She hadn't arrived yet. According to the documents Jeon Byung-soo had obtained, the state physician was supposed to arrive in Haean by the end of the month. 2 more weeks. 2 weeks during which every day someone died from a disease that could have been cured with boiled water and clean hands. Junho didn't wait. On the 17th day, he gathered 20 women from the community kitchen, the ones who cooked porridge, and explained 3 things to them. First, the water from the river kills, not the water itself, what lives in it. Something small, invisible to the eye, but deadly. The water must be boiled before drinking it, always, without exception. The women looked at him. Some nodded. Some thought he was crazy. Second, hands. Hands carry the same infection as the water. Before eating, after using the outhouse, before touching a child. Wash them with water and ash. Ash replaces soap, which wasn't available here. Third, separate the sick from the healthy. Do not banish them. Do not abandon them. Separate them. A separate room, separate dishes. Whoever cares for the sick washes their hands every hour. 20 women listened. Then one asked, "How does the magistrate know this?" Junho answered without hesitation. From books. Old ones. Very old ones. Long forgotten. The woman nodded. Books, that made sense. Books, they were respected. The magistrate is a learned man. He knows. 3 days later, the death rate from dysentery had fallen by half. Not because Junho had done anything complicated, but because 20 women had started boiling water and washing their hands with ash.
And they told their neighbors about it, and the neighbors told theirs. Within a week, the whole town was boiling water. After 2 days, even the old doctor with his toads began washing his hands. On the 23rd day, So In-hye arrived. Junho was standing at the gate of the town hall when he saw the rider. She was riding a chestnut horse.
Her back was straight. Her shoulders were squared. Behind her were two assistants with bundles on mules. She dismounted with ease. She looked at the county office, at the peeling sign, at the guards at the gate, at Jun-ho. She introduced herself. So In-hye, state physician, assigned to Haein County to monitor the epidemic situation by order of the Sogyeong Provincial Office. Her voice was even. Her face was calm, a slightly ironic curve at the corners of her lips. The report lit up. So In-hye, 26 years old, related to the So clan, a distant branch. Education, court medicine. Received additional training from foreign monks from the southern islands. Knowledge of hygiene and herbal medicine significantly exceeds the imperial standard. Covert mission. Surveillance of Magistrate Lee Jun-ho on behalf of the capital's faction. Not the So clan. Another faction. Chancellor Moon Chang-ho, the reformist faction. They're watching him too, but for a different purpose. Jun-ho blinked. He reread it. The reformist faction. They'd sent their own person here, not to destroy him, to observe him, to assess him, to decide if he was worth the investment. That changed everything. He invited In-hye into his office. He offered her tea. She sat down. She sipped it in small sips. She looked around. She saw a stack of Soyeon's documents on the desk, Moon's map on the wall, Haejin's lists, the rice consumption charts that Jun-ho had drawn by hand. Her eyes lingered on the charts. She asked what they were. Jun-ho replied that they showed grain consumption over 23 days. The horizontal axis was time, the vertical axis was quantity. In-hye was silent. Then she said she'd never seen numbers drawn like that it was convenient, that you could see the trend right away. Jun-ho nodded. Then he took out a blank sheet of paper. He picked up a brush and drew a circle, a small one, an uneven one. He said that this was what people in his county were dying from, not from hunger, from this, small, invisible, living in dirty water and on unwashed hands. It gets inside and destroys the body. In-hye looked at the circle for a long time. Then she looked up. There was something new in them. Not irony, not suspicion. Interest. Genuine. Eager.
She said that the southern monks had spoken of similar things, that illness was not the wrath of spirits, but something alive that spreads from person to person. But they couldn't explain the mechanism. Jun-ho spent the next 2 hours explaining the theory of contagion to her, in simple terms, without technical terms that didn't exist here, using analogies. Imagine that tiny worms live in water, so small that the eye can't see them. They enter the body and multiply. The body fights back. If the body is strong, it wins. If it's weak from hunger, cold, or old age, the worms win. Boiling water kills the worms. Ash on your hands kills the worms. A clean cloth over a wound keeps the worms from getting inside. In-hye listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She asked questions, precise ones, quick ones. Why ash? What in it kills them? At what temperature do these worms die? Can you see them if you take very clear water and look through a drop of glass? Jun-ho froze at the last question. She had just described a microscope without knowing the word, without having seen the device, simply by following logic. He said yes, that you can see through a drop of glass. What's inside it? He paused. He said that old books describe such instruments. In-hye nodded. She stood up. She said she needed a day to survey the county. Then she'd return with a plan. She returned a day later. Not a day later, after one night. She hadn't slept. The plan was on 4 sheets of paper. A hospital, a location,
The building of the former stables by the north gate, spacious, stone floor, easy to clean. Staff, herself, her 2 assistants, plus 10 women from the town whom she would train within a week. Basic procedures: oiling instruments, rinsing wounds with clean water, willow bark decoctions for fever, isolating the seriously ill, a separate room for women in labor, a separate one for children, a section on supplies, cloth for bandages, ash, vinegar, alcohol. Stop. Junho looked at the last word. Alcohol. In-He had said that alcohol kills germs better than ash. Monks in the south used it to wipe down wounds and instruments. But there's no alcohol in Heian. Junho smiled. Alcohol. Rice alcohol. Substandard rice, the kind you can't eat because it's gotten damp or started to spoil. You can distill alcohol from it, not for drinking, for medicine, for treating wounds, for wiping down instruments. And besides, it's also a commodity, one that can be sold, beyond the county borders.
To military garrisons where wounds fester after every skirmish with bandits. To temples where monks treat pilgrims. To other counties where people also fall ill and die from filth. He jotted it down. Malt house, distillation apparatus. He knew the principle from his university course on the history of technology. Simple distillation, a boiler, a tube, cooling. Blacksmith. Che Do-yun would build the equipment in a week. In-He watched as he wrote. Then she asked quietly, "Who are you?" Junho looked up. She was looking at him without a smile, without irony, with the expression a person has when they realize that what stands before them is something impossible and is trying to solve it, whether he believes it or not. Junho replied that he was the magistrate of Heian County. In-He said that magistrates don't draw diagrams, don't know about invisible worms, and don't invent distillation apparatus in 5 minutes. Junho replied that this magistrate does. In-He was silent. She nodded. She said she didn't care who he was. What mattered to her was what he did, and that if he gave her a hospital, alcohol, and 10 women, she would reduce the mortality rate by 2/3 in a month. Junho said she would get everything. On the 25th day, the hospital opened. A former stable, cleaned out, whitewashed with lime. The stone floor had been washed with vinegar. 10 beds in one wing, 5 in isolation, a separate room for women in labor. In-He stood at the entrance in a clean white coat and received the first patients. 2 children with fevers, an old man with inflamed lungs, a woman with a non-healing wound on her arm. The wound was rinsed with boiled water, treated with rice wine, bandaged with clean cloth. The woman screamed in pain. 3 days later, the wound began to heal. A week later, she removed the bandage. No pus, no inflammation, clean pink skin. The woman stood there looking at her arm, unable to believe it. In-He stood nearby, watching as well, and in her eyes was what Junho saw in the mirror every morning. Hunger, not for food, but for meaning, for the sense that one's work matters. Blacksmith Che Do-yun arrived on the hospital's 2nd day of operation. Winter arrived on the 32nd day, not gradually, but all at once. A wind from the northern mountains blew in during the night, and by morning the water in the jugs was covered with a crust of ice.
The temperature had dropped so much that the guard's breath at the gate turned into white clouds.
Junho stood in the courtyard of the administrative office and looked up at the sky. Grey, low-hanging, heavy. There was no snow, only cold, dry, biting, merciless. The report showed expected duration of the cold spell, 120 days. Current food supply, 291 units of rice, plus 17 units of barley, plus dried fish from the mountain lake, 4 carts,
plus the salted cabbage that He-jin had forced the market vendors to stockpile at a fixed price. 18 barrels. Under strict rations and a 3-tiered system, 94 days. 120 minus 94. 26 days of shortage. 26 days at the end of winter when the food runs out and spring has not yet arrived. Junho knew that those 26 days would kill people. Not hunger. Despair. When supplies dwindle before their eyes, people begin to hide, hoard, and steal from one another. The system collapses not from scarcity, but from the fear of scarcity. He had to close that gap. 26 days. He convened a council, not his aides, a council. Soyeon, He-jin, Kwon Tae-soo, Moon So-hyun with his map, In-hye, Yuna with the restored books. 6 people at the table in the main hall. Junho spread Moon's map out on the floor. Everyone sat down around it. He explained the situation, the numbers, the days, the shortage. 26 days. Silence. Then He-jin spoke up. She said there was grain in the neighboring county of Yeonju, a lot of it. The magistrate of Yeonju was an old fox named Park Chun-ho. He isn't starving. His county is further south. The drought hit it less severely. He has a surplus, but he isn't selling it. He's keeping prices high. He's waiting until his neighbors start dying, and then he'll sell it for 10 times the price. A classic speculator. Junho asked what Heian has that Yeongju doesn't. He-jin answered immediately. Salt. The salt flats are beyond the pass. The road leading to them is almost finished. The first carts will pass through in a week. Salt in Yeonju costs 5 times as much as in Heian. That's because Yeonju is far from the sea and the salt flats. If we trade salt for grain... Moon pointed to the road between the counties on the map. A 3-day journey, over the pass. Dangerous in winter, but possible. Kwon said he'd provide 10 guards to protect the caravan. Junho nodded. Then he looked at Soyeon. She was silent.
She was calculating. He could tell by the look in her eyes. She calculated in her head faster than he could on paper. Then she spoke. If the exchange rate is 1 to 3, 1 sock of salt for 3 socks of grain, and if they send 20 carts of salt, that's 60 socks of grain. 26 days at 2 socks a day is 52 socks at a minimum. 60 would cover the shortfall with room to spare. But 20 cartloads of salt is the entire 2-month supply from the salt pans. The county would be left without salt, and without salt they couldn't salt meat and fish for the spring. Silence. Junho thought. A vicious cycle. Give up the salt and get grain, but lose the chance to stock up for the spring. Keep the salt and lose 26 days. Then In-hye said quietly that more salt could be extracted. The salt works operate all winter. If they extended the shifts and added more workers to production, there are people available. The Rice for Work program. Some of the workers from the canal, which can't be dug out of because the ground is frozen, transfer them to the salt mines. Junho looked at her. She was right. The canal is frozen until spring. 600 people are out of work. If we transfer 300 to the salt mines, they'll replenish the salt supply in 2 months. And 20 carts will go to Yeonju and return with grain. He approved the plan. The caravan leaves in 5 days. He-jin is negotiating with the magistrate of Yeonju. She knew him, not personally, but she knew who his mistress was and how much he owed the capital's moneylender. That was enough to steer the conversation in the right direction. Kwon is assembling the security detail. Soyeon is calculating the exact exchange ratios. Moon is mapping out the route. In-hye is providing medicine for the journey. Everyone knew their place. Everyone did their part. Junho looked at them and thought that, For the first time in his life, he had a real team, not subordinates waiting for orders, a team that thinks for itself. On the 37th day, the caravan set out. 20 wagons, 10 guards. He-jin rode ahead on horseback wearing a fur cloak with the look of a man who was setting out not to trade, but to conquer. Jun-ho stood at the gate and watched them go. So-yeon stood beside him. She was silent. Then she said that He-jin would return with grain. Jun-ho asked how she knew. So-yeon replied that He wasn't the kind of person who came back empty-handed. There was no jealousy in her voice. There was respect. Quiet, reluctant, but genuine.
While the caravan was away, Jun-ho set about doing what could no longer be put off. The malt house. The production of rice alcohol. Blacksmith Che Do-yun had been working on the distillation apparatus for 6 days. Jun-ho drew him a diagram, a pot with a lid, a copper tube coiled into a spiral, a barrel of cold water through which the tube passes. Steam rises. It passes through the tube. It cools. It condenses. It drips into a vessel. Pure alcohol. Che Do-yun looked at the diagram, then at Jun-ho, then back at the diagram. He said it could be done, but that he needed copper for the tube. There was no copper in Heian. Jun-ho remembered Moon's map. An abandoned mine 12 li east of the city. Moon had marked it with a cross and added a question mark next to copper ore. Jun-ho sent 5 men there with Moon. They returned 3 days later. There was ore. Not much, but enough for the pipe. Che Do-yun smelted the copper. He bent the pipe into shape. He assembled the apparatus. On the 43rd day, the first drop of rice alcohol fell into a clay cup. In-hye stood nearby. She took the cup. She sniffed it. She dripped some onto a piece of cloth. She pressed it against a cut on her finger. She winced at the burning sensation. She looked at Jun-ho. She said it would work. Better than ash. Better than vinegar. It's a real weapon against infection. Jun-ho nodded. Then he said the first batch was going to the hospital. The second would be for sale. In-hye raised an eyebrow. Jun-ho explained. The military garrison in Munsan County. 200 soldiers. Constant skirmishes with bandits. Wounds are festering. People are dying not from swords, but from the filth on the swords. If we offer the garrison commander alcohol for treating wounds at a reasonable price, he'll buy it, and he'll tell others. In-hye was silent. Then she smiled wryly. She said that Jun-ho was turning medicine into a business. Jun-ho replied that he was turning business into medicine. The difference is small but important. On the 44th day, He-jin returned. Not with 20 carts, but with 25. 60 sacks of grain, plus 5 carts of dried beans that He-jin had bargained for on top of the main deal. The magistrate of Yongju turned out to be greedy, but not stupid. He-jin offered him not a one-time exchange, but a permanent trade route. Salt from Heian to Yeonju. Grain from Yeonju to Heian. Every month. On the 50th day of winter, the mountain people arrived. Jun-ho stood on the wall and looked north. 20 horsemen, small, shaggy horses. The riders wore fur cloaks, bows on their backs, spears in their hands.
They stopped 500 paces from the gate and waited. Kwon Tae-soo stood nearby with his hand on his sword. He said they were the Mohi, a mountain tribe, semi-nomads. They live beyond the pass. Formally subjects of the empire, in reality they're on their own. They come in the winter, sometimes to trade, sometimes to raid. It depends on the chieftain's mood. The report confirmed it. The Mohi tribe. Population of about 2,000. Chieftain Yun Tae-jon. Current situation? Famine. 70% of the livestock has been lost over the past 2 years of drought. Purpose of the visit? Negotiations. Not a raid. Negotiations. Level of desperation? Critical. Junho climbed down from the wall. He told Kwon to open the gate. Kwon looked at him as if he were a suicide mission. He said that 20 Mohi horsemen could slaughter half the city in an hour. Junho replied that the 20 starving horsemen had not come to slaughter but to ask for help, and that if he didn't let them in, they'd return with 200, and then they wouldn't be asking any more. Kwon clenched his teeth. He opened the gates. The horsemen rode in slowly. A girl rode at the front. Not a man. A girl. A young one. Her face was weather-beaten. Her cheekbones were high. Her eyes were dark and straight as arrows. She wore wolf fur on her shoulders. The bow on her back was no ornament. The bowstring had rubbed a callus on 3 fingers of her right hand. A flash of recognition struck him. Yun Dari, 20 years old, the chieftain's daughter, sent as an envoy hostage, authority to negotiate, full authority. Talent, leadership, tactical thinking, archery, horseback riding, 3 languages. Junho rode up to her. She didn't dismount. She looked down at him from above. She said in broken imperial that her father, Chief Yun Taejong, wanted to speak with the man who fed the city. Junho replied that the man who feeds the city was standing right in front of her and suggested they talk at a table rather than on horseback. Dari looked at him. Then she smiled. She jumped down from her horse. She was tall, almost as tall as Junho. She smelled of smoke, horses, and mountain wind. She walked past the guards without paying them any, as if they didn't exist. The negotiations lasted 4 hours. Dari spoke plainly, without courtly formalities.
Without hints, the Mohi are starving, the livestock are dying. Winter will kill half the tribe if nothing is done. Her father is proposing an exchange. The Mohi will provide meat, wool, and hides. Heian will provide grain, salt, and protection from the bandits who raid the mountain encampments. Long-term, not a one-time exchange, a permanent alliance. Junho listened. The report laid out the situation for him. The Mohi control the mountain trails, 3 passes. Without their consent, not a single caravan will make it north. They also know every water source in the mountains, every cave, every trail. In winter, when the roads freeze over, the Mohi's mountain trails are the only route to the northern markets. An alliance with the Mohi isn't charity, it's a strategy. Junho proposed the terms. Heian would supply grain and salt at a fixed price. The Mohi would supply meat, wool, and hides. The Mohi are granted the right to trade in Heian's market duty-free. Mohi children can attend the school that Junho plans to open in the spring. They will be allowed to preserve their language. The Mohi will help guard the mountain roads and trade caravans. Heian will protect the Mohi's encampments from bandits using the county guard. Dari listened. Her expression did not change. Then she said that her father had expected something else. He had expected the magistrate to demand hostages, or submission, or military service. Junho replied that he didn't need slaves. He needed neighbors. Dari looked at him for a long time. Then she said she would stay in Heian, as a representative of her tribe and as a guarantee. Her father had sent her specifically for this purpose, as a hostage, but on terms that weren't humiliating. Junho agreed. Dari was given a room in the town hall. That very first evening, she joined the communal dinner table. Soyeon greeted her politely, coldly, as one greets a dangerous guest. Dari looked at Soyeon. Then she said, in an imperial tone, with a strong mountain accent,
that Soyeon's husband was strange but seemed honest, and that she liked that. Soyeon didn't reply, but she didn't look away either. 3 days later, the first Mohi caravan arrived in Heian. 12 horses, dried meat, sheep's wool, goat hides. The inventory report confirmed it. The meat was clean and of good quality. The wool was coarse but warm. The hides were well tanned. Hejin accepted the goods at the market. She assessed them. She paid from the treasury.
The meat went to the public kitchens. For the first time in 2 months, there was meat in the porridge. Not much, 2 pieces the size of a finger per bowl, but it was meat. Protein, strength. The children who ate this porridge on the first day of the meat ration didn't know what a strategic alliance with a mountain tribe was. They only knew that the porridge had become tastier. That was enough. On the 55th day, Junho faced his first real revolt. Not a clan-based one, a popular uprising. A group of peasants from the western villages, about 100 people. They came to the town hall with sticks and hoes. They shouted that the grain was being distributed unfairly, that the city folk were getting more, that the villagers had been forgotten, that the magistrate was feeding the merchants and the mountain savages while abandoning his own people. Junho went out to meet them, alone. Kwon wanted to bring out the guards. Junho stopped him. He said that sticks against swords wasn't a riot but a cry for help. He stood before the crowd and listened. The roster showed each one. Tired, hungry, angry, but not hostile, not organized, a spontaneous outburst. The leader of the crowd, a man in his 40s, Kim Chang-soo, a former squad leader, sturdy, loud. He had brought the people out not because he hated the magistrate, but because his children hadn't eaten in 2 days. The public kitchen in his village had closed a week ago. They'd run out of rice. No new shipment had arrived. Junho asked which village it was. Kim Chang-soo replied, Nampo village, on the western edge of the county, a 3-hour walk from the city. Junho checked the register. Nampo, 412 residents. The public kitchen closed 8 days ago. Reason? Hong So-chol, the clerk in charge of supplies, failed to send the rice. Why? Because Hong So-chol has been bedridden with a fever for 6 days and no one has taken over his duties. A systemic failure. No malicious intent. Not theft. Just a typical bureaucratic loophole. 1 sick clerk and 400 people without food. Junho turned to Park. He ordered him to send 2 cartloads of rice to Nampo immediately, today, right now. Then he turned to the crowd. He said it was his fault, not the peasants, not the clerk, him, the magistrate, because a system in which a single sick person can leave an entire village without food is a bad system, and that he would fix it, today. The crowd was silent. Kim Chang-soo looked at him. Then he asked when the rice would arrive.
Junho replied, "Before sunset."
Kim Chang-soo nodded. He turned to his people. He said they were going home. They left. No shouting, no sticks. They simply turned around and walked down the road back to their village. Kwon stood nearby, unable to believe it. He said that any other magistrate would have ordered the ringleader's arrest. Junho replied that the ringleader was right, and that the best way to quell a riot is to eliminate its cause, not its leader. Kwon shook his head. He didn't understand, but he obeyed. That evening, Junho overhauled the entire supply system. Each village was assigned 2 officials instead of 1. If one fell ill, the other would take over. Every 5 days, Yuna checks the supply reports and notes any omissions. Any delay of more than 2 days is reported directly to Junho. A reserve supply of 3 sok is kept in every kitchen at all times. He wrote this down on a sheet of paper and hung it in the main hall. So-yeon read it. She said it resembled what she'd seen in old books on military supply systems, only for peacetime. Jun-ho nodded. Military logistics for a starving county. That's exactly right. On the 58th day, he received another piece of news. Jong Byung-soo arrived at night. Quiet, pale, shaking. He said he had information. So Young-il had returned from the provincial capital. He wasn't alone. 10 men were with him. Not soldiers, not officials. Mercenaries. Professionals. They had stopped in the village of Maidong, in that very house of So Young-il with the double fence. Their goal? Not to kill Jun-ho. Worse, to set the granaries on fire. All 4 government granaries filled with grain, at the same time, at night. If the grain burns in winter, Heian will die. Not slowly from starvation, quickly from panic. 431 sacks would turn to ashes, and with them, the hope of 40,000 people. Jun-ho listened to Jong, and something inside him grew cold. Not fear. Anger. A quiet, icy anger he had never felt in his past life. In his past life, he had written strategies and reports, and no one's life depended on them. Here, lives depended on 4 granaries. He asked Jong when. Jong said he didn't know exactly. Soon, within the next 5 days. Jun-ho called for Kwon. He called for Dari. They came into his office. He explained the situation. 10 mercenaries, 4 granaries, a nighttime arson attack. Kwon said he could post guards at each granary, 5 men each.
But then the city will be left without patrols. Dari said she could station her men at the approaches to the city.
If the mercenaries were coming from Medon, they'd take the northern road. 10 of Mohee's horsemen would block the road. Jun-ho shook his head. He said they wouldn't wait. They would strike first. Kwon raised an eyebrow. Jun-ho explained. 10 mercenaries in Medon are waiting for nightfall. They don't know that Jong has betrayed So. They don't know that Jun-ho knows. Winter was well past its midpoint and had begun to really take its toll. The 60th day. The temperature had dropped so much that the water in the canal had frozen all the way to the bottom. The walls of the houses were covered with frost on the inside. Firewood had become the second most scarce commodity after food. People were burning everything: broken furniture, old fences, straw from the roofs. Jun-ho watched all this and kept track. The ledger showed the county's firewood supply. 13 days at the current rate of consumption. After that, people would start to freeze. He knew this problem well. In his past life, he had read about the siege of Leningrad, the winter of 41, -30, no firewood. People were burning books, furniture, and parquet flooring. The solution they found back then? Peat. They serve from beneath the ice, with frozen hams. There was no peat in the vicinity of Heian, but there was coal. Moon So-hyun marked 2 coal seam outcrops on the map in the eastern hills, about 10 li from the city. Coal burns hotter than wood. It burns longer. 1 basket of coal replaces 3 baskets of firewood. Jun-ho sent 30 men to the hills. 3 days later, the first carts of coal arrived in the city. Black, heavy, unfamiliar. People watched with suspicion. No one in Heian had ever heated their homes with coal. Jun-ho ordered a coal brazier to be lit in the square in front of City Hall. He did it himself. People stood and watched as the black stones caught fire. The heat was intense, steady. It lasted for hours. By evening, a line had formed outside the town hall. Each family received a basket of coal for free from the city's reserves. On the 65th day, Jun-ho did what he could no longer put off. He spoke with Soyeon, not about documents, not about numbers, about them. Evening. His office. A brazier with coal. On table, 2 cups of tea. Soyeon sat across from him and waited. She knew what he wanted to talk about. Women always know. Junho began awkwardly.
He said he wasn't the man she'd married. Soyeon looked up. There was no surprise in her eyes. She replied that she knew, that she'd realized it on the 3rd day. But the man who asks his wife to check the tax ledgers isn't the same man who, a year ago, couldn't remember how much a sack of rice cost. That the man who draws graphs and calculates in his head faster than any bureaucrat isn't the same quiet underachiever she'd seen before he fainted. Junho was silent. Then he asked if she was afraid. Soyeon replied that she was. Every day. Not of him, for him. Because a man who does what he does doesn't live long in the Tewa Empire. Because the clans don't forgive, the capital doesn't protect, and the only thing standing between him and the noose is the result. As long as he feeds the people, they tolerate him. If he stops, they'll destroy him. Junho listened and realized that she saw the big picture more clearly than he did. Without the ledger, without the blue lines, simply because she had grown up in this world and knew its rules. He said he wouldn't stop. Soyeon nodded. She said she knew. And that was exactly why she checked his tea every evening before he drank it. And that was exactly why she didn't go to sleep until he did. And that was exactly why she was learning to calculate as quickly as she could. Because if something happened to him, someone had to carry on. And she wanted to be ready. Junho looked at her. At that moment, the ledger was silent. He didn't see the lines, the numbers, or the talents. He saw a 24-year-old woman who checked his tea every night and was learning to count so that, in the event of his death, 40,000 people wouldn't die. He reached his hand across the table. She looked at his hand, then at him. She placed her palm on top of his. Small, cold, with ink stains on her fingers. They sat like that for a minute, without saying a word. Then Soyeon withdrew her hand. She stood up. She said she would bring the coal consumption report in the morning and that supplies would need to be increased by 20% if the cold weather lasted another month. And she left. Junho sat there, staring at his cold tea. He was smiling. For the first time in 65 days. On the 70th day, he opened a school. Not a big one, just one room in the east wing of the town hall. The teacher, Moon So-hyun, who turned out to be not only a cartographer but also a decent calligrapher, and knew the 3 classical canons by heart. Students, 20 children, 10 from the city, 5 from nearby villages, 5 from the Mohi tribe. Dari brought them herself. 5 black-haired mountain children with frightened eyes in fur jackets, standing among the city kids in cotton robes. Moon looked at them. He looked at Junho. Junho said that all the children were taught the same way, the same lessons, the same porridge at recess. Anyone who bullied someone for being from the mountains or the city would have to clean the council's cesspit for a week. Moon nodded. After a week, the mountain children stopped being afraid. After 2 weeks, they began speaking the imperial language. After a month, a boy named Batar from the Mohi tribe outperformed all the city kids in calligraphy. His hand was steady from having pulling a bowstring. On the 75th day, a second letter arrived from the capital, from the court chancellery, not from the censorate, but from the court itself. It was brief and formal.
The magistrate of Heian County in Sogyeong Province was ordered to prepare a detailed report on the county's condition for the spring inspection. The report must include data on the population, reserves, expenditures, revenues, and measures to combat famine. The report is to be submitted to the inspector in person, signed not by the governor, not by the censor, but by the deputy chancellor. Junho read the letter twice. Then he showed it to He-jin. He-jin read it. Her expression changed. She said that the deputy chancellor was a man close to Chancellor Moon Chang-ho, the very same one, the reformist faction. They aren't just watching. They're requesting data, officially, through the court chancellery. This means that Junho's report had reached them, and it had made an impression. And someone at the top wants to see more. Junho asked if this was a good thing or a dangerous one. He-jin replied that in the capital they're one and the same. He began preparing the report. Not alone. With So-yeon. The two of them sat down every evening and wrote. Numbers, charts, tables. So-yeon insisted on rewriting everything in beautiful calligraphic handwriting. She said that in the capital, people read first with their eyes and then with their minds. A beautiful scroll makes an impression before it's even read. She was right. The report took up 12 scrolls. Everything Junho had done in 75 days, every figure verified, every decision explained. Spring arrived on the 92nd day. Not all at once. Slowly. First, drops from the roofs.
Then streams along the roads. Then the earth began to thaw and smelled the way only earth that has survived winter smells. Wet, heavy, alive. Junho stood on the wall and looked out over the valley. The snow was melting in layers. The canal that 1,500 people had cleared lay before him like a scar on the earth's body. 2 in length, 3 steps wide, lined with stone at the joints, waiting for water. A week later, the mountain stream began to flow. Water flowed through the canal. Junho stood by the upper sluice gate and watched as the murky stream filled the channel. Slowly, meter by meter. Standing nearby were Kwon Tae-soo, the foreman, and 24 peasants who had been digging this canal all winter. No one spoke. Everyone watched the water. When the stream reached the eastern fields and began to spread across the dry cracks, the foreman sat down on the ground. He just sat down. He hugged his knees and sat there. Then he said that his father had dug this canal 40 years ago, that his father had died without seeing water in it again, that now the water was flowing over the stones his father had laid. Junho listened and said nothing. The report showed that 500 mu of arable land were receiving water. By summer, rice would be growing here. Or perhaps not rice, sweet potatoes, buckwheat or millet. Drought-resistant crops that Junho had kept in mind from day one. He began spring planting on the 95th day, not the way they had sown in Heian for the past 100 years, a different approach. He divided all the county's fields into 3 zones. First, irrigated land along the canal. Rice, the main crop. No experiments. People need to see what they're used to. Second, the terraces on the eastern slopes. Sweet potatoes. Junho found them, not on his own, but through He-jin. She had contacted a merchant from Yeongju in the south who brought exotic goods from the islands. The merchant brought 3 sacks of tubers at a price He had been haggling for 2 days. Sweet potatoes. A sweet root that grows in poor soil. Doesn't require much water. Yields 3 times as much as rice from the same area. In his past life, Junho knew that sweet potatoes had saved Ireland, China, and half of Southeast Asia in different eras. Here, no one knew about them. The peasants looked at the strange tubers with suspicion.
Junho didn't bother to explain. He planted the first bed himself, personally, on his knees in the mud, hands in the soil.
A magistrate planting roots in the earth. The peasants stood and watched. Then one approached, sat down beside him, began to dig. A second followed. By evening, 3 terraces had been planted. The third zone, the northern fields near the border with the mountains. Buckwheat. It grows quickly. It matures in 2 months. It isn't bothered by cold nights. The grain is coarse but nutritious. You can grind it into flour. You can cook porridge. You can feed it to livestock. A versatile safety net. Mun So-hyun marked all 3 zones on the map, by color: blue for rice, orange for sweet potatoes, brown for buckwheat. The map hung in the main hall, and every village elder could come and see where each crop grew and why it was planted there. Junho explained it to everyone personally, patiently, not in a condescending way, as an equal. Sweet potatoes are here because the slope faces south and gets plenty of sun. Buckwheat is here because the soil is rocky and there wouldn't be enough water for rice. Rice is here because the canal provides irrigation. Every decision is tied to the location. Every location has a reason. People listened. Not everyone believed him, but they planted. Because the magistrate who had kept their children from dying that winter deserved one spring of trust. On the 100th day, an inspector arrived from the capital. Not the Hongdu Jew sent by the governor, another one. A young official from the court chancellery. Thin, serious, glasses. The records confirmed it. An Gi-hyun, 31 years old, personal secretary to the deputy chancellor, a member of the reformist faction. His assignment, to verify the data from Magistrate Heian's report, in person, on site. If the data is confirmed, report to Chancellor Moon Chang-ho for presentation to the emperor. Junho met him at the gate, led him through the city, not to City Hall, through the streets, through the market where He-jin oversaw 30 stalls and prices were written in chalk on the wall for all to see, through the hospital where In-hae showed him the dressing room, the isolation ward, and the women giving birth for the first time in clean conditions, through the public kitchen where 400 people ate porridge with meat twice a day, past the school where 20 children, including the mountain mohi, were writing characters under Moon's guidance, past the canal, past the fields, past the malt house where rice alcohol was dripping and Che Do-yun was wiping his tools with it.
An Gi-hyun walked in silence. He watched. He took notes. He counted. 2 days later, he asked to see the documents. Junho gave him everything, all 12 scrolls of the report, all of Soyeon's tables, all of Yuna's restored books, all of Mun's maps, all of He-jin's market reports. An Gi-hyun read for 3 days, without leaving the room set aside for him. Yuna brought him his meals. On the 4th day, he came out. His expression was strange. He asked to speak with the magistrate in private. They sat down in the office. An Gi-hyun laid his notes out in front of Junho. He said he had checked every single figure. Every single one. He had personally recounted the supplies in the granaries. He had personally interviewed the elders in the 4 villages. He had personally spoken with the patients at the hospital. Everything adds up. He said that in his 12 years of service in the Royal Chancellery, he had never seen a single report that corresponded to reality. Not a single one. Every magistrate lies. Every governor inflates the figures. Every censor turns a blind eye. And here is a report that is true down to the very last grain. He asked how. Junho replied that the truth is cheaper than a lie. A lie requires effort to maintain. The truth requires effort only once, to write it down. An Gi-hyun remained silent. Then he said that the chancellor would be pleased, that the data would be presented to the emperor,
that the spring inspection regarding the heresy charges would be cancelled, that Magistrate Heian had been advised to continue his service. He paused. Then he added quietly that the governor of Sogyong province had been advised to come to the capital to provide an explanation. Not ordered, advised. For now. Junho nodded. He knew that a recommendation from the court chancellery was an order wrapped in silk. So Daegyong would travel to the capital. Or he would be brought there. An Gi-hyun left the next day, quietly, without a farewell banquet, without ceremony. He mounted his horse and rode off. Junho stood at the gate and watched him go. Hei-jin stood beside him. She said this was just the beginning, not the end. The capital had taken notice of Heian. Now Heian had to live up to expectations. Every day, every month, with no room for error, because those at the top were waiting for a reason to either elevate him or destroy him. There was no third option. Junho replied that the third option was exactly what he intended to do.
Hei-jin raised an eyebrow. He said he intended to make Heian so indispensable that he could neither be elevated nor destroyed, only left to do his work. Hei-jin smirked. She said it was the most boring plan for seizing power she'd ever heard in her entire life, and that was exactly why it might work. The summer of his first year was when Heian began to earn a living. Not just survive, earn a living. The first harvest of sweet potatoes came on the 150th day, sooner than Junho had expected. The terraces on the eastern slopes yielded so much that the farmers, who had planted the tubers with skepticism, now stood before the rows and could not believe their eyes. 1 mew of sweet potatoes yielded 3 times as much as 1 mew of rice. 3 times as much. The roots were large, sweet, filling. The children ate them baked and asked for more. The elders chewed slowly and said they couldn't remember anything like it. Junho stood among the terraces as the bulletin displayed the forecast. If all the eastern slopes were planted with sweet potatoes, by next year the county would be producing 120% of its food needs. A surplus, for the first time in a decade. The buckwheat in the northern fields had ripened even earlier. The coarse, dark flour was used to make flatbreads, which became the staple of the diet in the public kitchens. The rice was made available. Part of it went into the granaries as a reserve, the stabilization fund that Soyeon had devised. 10% of each harvest, untouchable, in case of the next winter, or the next drought, or the next crisis, one that Junho couldn't foresee but for which he could prepare. The distillery was operating at full capacity. 3 stills. Che Do-yun built the second and third ones within a month. The rice alcohol went in 2 directions. Half to Inhe Hospital, half for sale. The first caravan left for the Munsan military garrison. The garrison commander tested the alcohol on one of the soldiers' wounds. A week later, he sent a messenger with an order for 10 barrels. A month later, orders came in from 3 garrisons. Money began flowing into the treasury, not from taxes but from trade. Junho looked at the figures and smiled. In his past life, he would have written diversification of income sources in a report. Here, he simply did things that brought in money. The paper workshop opened on the 160th day. The idea was simple. Silk scraps from weavers, old straw, mulberry bark. All of this could be ground up and turned into paper. In the Tehua Empire, paper was expensive. Scribes didn't have enough. Officials saved every sheet. Good paper came from the capital and cost as much as silver. Junho hired a blacksmith from the town Nampo, the very same Kim Chang-soo who had led the rebels to the county office. That incident had revealed his talent. An organizer, a leader, a man others would follow.
Jun-ho gave him a workshop and 20 workers. Kim Chang-soo, who 3 months earlier had been shouting at the county office gates with a stick in his hands, now walked through the workshop, checking the quality of the paper pulp, and scolded the apprentices who were mixing the solution incorrectly. The first batch of Heian paper was sent to Yongju with the next Haejin caravan. The magistrate of Yongju bought it all. He asked for more. On the 171st day, Jun-ho opened the mutual aid fund, the very one he'd conceived while watching Baeson. Every free peasant contributes 1 coin per season. The fund is used to redeem the debts of those in bondage. Those whose debts are redeemed also begin to pay. The first 30 people signed up that very day. A month later, the fund held 112 coins. The first debt was redeemed on the 108th 15. A woman named Oh Soo-jin, 32 years old, a widow. She owed the John clan 6 coins for her husband's funeral. She had worked for them for free for 2 years. The fund paid the 6 coins. Oh Soo-jin came to the council office. She stood at the threshold. She didn't cry. She didn't say thank you. She just stood there, holding a piece of paper that said she no longer owed anything. So-yeon came out to meet her. She offered her a cup of tea. She told her that she was now free, and that, if she wanted, she could work at the paper workshop. They paid 3 coins a month. Oh Soo-jin nodded. She left. The next day she came to the workshop. She worked in silence, quickly and precisely. A week later, Kim Chang-soo told Jun-ho that Oh Soo-jin was the best worker in the workshop and that he wanted to promote her to forewoman. Jun-ho nodded. There was so much work that the days blurred together. In-hae expanded the hospital. Now it had 30 beds. Choi Do-yun had risen from blacksmith to senior paramedic in 6 months. In-hae said that his hands could do things she herself could not replicate.
He applied splints, reset joints, and sutured wounds with linen thread with such precision that In-hae fell silent and could only shake her head. Dari brought another 40 Mohi families to the valley. They were building permanent homes, not yurts, houses, made of stone and wood, modelled after those of Heian, but with sloping mountain roofs to shield against the wind. The Mohi children attended school. Bata, the boy with the calligrapher's touch, was now helping Mun redraw the map onto a large sheet for the main hall. His hand was so steady that the lines looked as if they had been printed. Yuna had finished reconstructing the tax records for all 5 years. The last year turned out to be the hardest. There were almost no fragments left. She reconstructed them from memory, based on conversations with merchants and elders, and even with the widow of the former magistrate, who lived in a village outside the city and didn't want to see anyone. Yuna visited her 7 times. 7 times the old woman chased her away. On the 8th visit, she let her in, and she told her everything. Where the books were, who burned them, why. The order came from Sir Yong-il to burn the evidence. The tax ledgers were the only proof of embezzlement. No ledgers, no crime. But Yuna remembered. Every page, every number, every signature. She pieced it all back together, and Jun-ho placed that stack into the very same folder that was growing heavier and heavier. On the 200th day, Jun-ho received the news he had been both waiting for and dreading. Governor Seo Dae-gyong refused to travel to the capital. The recommendation from the Royal Chancellery was ignored. Instead, Seo Dae-gyong was gathering allies. 3 neighboring governors and 8 heads of Yangban. 22 magistrates who fed off the system. They all understood one thing. If Heian survived as a model, if a commoner magistrate proved that a county could be governed without clans and without bribes, then everything would collapse. The entire order, the entire hierarchy, everything that had sustained them for decades. A coalition was forming against Jun-ho.
Not just one provincial governor, not just one clan, dozens. He Jin found out first, through her contacts in the capital. She came to Junho that night. Her expression was serious. No smirk, no irony. She said the coalition planned to submit a petition to the emperor. The content? Heian's magistrate is violating the established order.
Appointing women to office, admitting mountain savages into the cities. He is dismantling the merchant guilds. He is undermining the power of the clans. He is threatening the stability of the empire. 30 signatures on the petition. 30 seals. This isn't a complaint from a single aggrieved governor. This is the voice of the system. Junho listened. Then he asked when the petition would reach the emperor. He Jin replied that it would take 2 months by fall. 2 months. He looked at the map of Mun on the wall, at the figures for revenue and expenditure, at He Jin's lists, at Soyon's tables. Then he said he needed 2 months to make Heian invulnerable, not for the clans, but for the emperor. If, by the time the petition lands on the emperor's desk, he sees a county that pays its taxes on time, feeds 2 neighboring provinces, and produces goods found nowhere else in the empire, then the emperor will ask himself, why should I change what works? For 2 months, Junho worked harder than he ever had before. Not at McKinsey, not at City Hall, not even during his entire 100 days in Heian up to that point. He slept only 3 hours a night. The ledger burned his temples with a constant stream of data. He had a nosebleed every other day. Soyeon stopped asking him to rest. She realized it was useless. Instead, she began sleeping in his office on a second mat so she could be there when he collapsed. The first month. Production. The malt house was operating at full capacity. 20 barrels of rice alcohol per month. 10 went to the garrisons, 5 to neighboring counties, 5 remained for the hospital. Kim Chang-soo's paper cooperative had tripled in size. 40 workers. Heian paper was shipped to 4 counties. Soft, durable, half the price of the capitals. The soy sauce workshop. Junho opened it on the 210th day. Soy sauce and miso on an industrial scale. In the Tewa Empire, every family made sauce at home, slowly, in small quantities. Junho knew from the history of Japanese Meiji-era cooperatives how to centralize production. Large vats, a standardized recipe, quality control. He-jin found a master soy sauce maker from Chungju province, a 70-year-old man. He had fled famine. He came to Heian because he'd heard that people were fed here and not beaten. Junho gave him a workshop, 10 apprentices, and an unlimited supply of soybeans from the trade route with Yongju. The first barrel of Heian sauce sold out in a month. The merchants tasted it and ordered 100 barrels. The second month. The system. Junho introduced double-entry bookkeeping. Every coin in the treasury was recorded twice. Income and expenditure. Debit and credit. The balance was checked every evening. Soyeon kept the main ledger and Yuna kept the control ledger. The figures had to match every single day. If there was a discrepancy of more than 1 coin, Junho would find out that very evening. No official in the empire worked under such a system. No official in the empire knew what double-entry bookkeeping was. Junho spent 3 evenings explaining the principle to Soyeon. She mastered it in 2. On the 3rd evening, she asked a question he hadn't expected. She asked if the same principle could be applied to people, a population registry. Every county resident is recorded twice, in the general registry and in the village registry. Births, deaths, marriages, moves. If the data doesn't match, it means someone is lying or someone is missing. Junho looked at her and thought she had just invented a double-verified population census, without textbooks, without the internet, simply by applying his idea to a different context.
He approved her proposal. Yuna began compiling the registry that very day. The third thing, the school. Junho expanded it to 40 students, 20 from the city, 10 from the village, 10 from Moki. Moon So-hyung couldn't handle it alone. A second teacher was needed. Junho appointed Yuna. When Park Dong-soo heard that his daughter would be teaching the children, he stood in the middle of the courtyard and wept. Not out of grief, out of despair. The daughter of the office clerk, a 19-year-old girl, a teacher, in an empire where women were not allowed to take the civil service exams. Yuna walked into the classroom on the first day, her hands trembling. An hour later, they stopped. A day later, she was teaching 30 children the basics of arithmetic with such clarity that Moon stood at the door listening, his mouth agape. On the 230th day, Junho opened a school of practical administration. 16 students, young clerks and low-ranking officials from 3 neighboring counties who had come to Heian to see how the system worked. Junho personally taught the classes every evening. He didn't teach the canons. He taught them how to count, read documents, verify figures, spot discrepancies, create tables and draw graphs, to plan a budget. The 16 students sat at their desks and looked at him as if he was speaking the language of the gods.
But he spoke the language of Arabic numerals and decimal fractions. One of the students was a woman, Jong Mire, the daughter of a granary thief, the very one who had been sent as a hostage and who had spent 3 months looking for a way to kill him. In half a year, she had become the head of intelligence, 40 people under her command, a network of informants in 5 villages. She knew about every stranger in the county within an hour of their arrival. But that wasn't enough for her. She wanted to understand the system. She wanted to know not only who the enemy was, but also why they were the enemy and how to turn them into an ally. She went to Junho and told him she wanted to study. Junho enrolled her in the school. When word of this reached the neighboring counties, the scandal made its way to the capital. A woman in a school of administration. Unheard of. Jong Mira responded to the scandal in the only way she knew how. She finished the course first, with the best results. Junho read her final report on winter supply logistics 3 times. Not because he was looking for mistakes, because he couldn't find a single one. On the 250th day, the deadline arrived. The petition signed by 30 officials was to be placed on the emperor's desk. Junho gathered his team one last time before what was about to happen. Everyone was in the main hall. Soyeon, Haejin, Kwon, Moon, Inhe, Yuna, Dari, Mire. 8 people. His army. He stood before them and spoke. He said that the petition wasn't the end. It was the beginning, because the 30 officials who signed it had made one mistake. They had asked the emperor to pay attention to Heian, and the emperor would pay attention. Only he wouldn't see what they wanted him to see. He would see a county that pays taxes, that feeds its neighbors, that produces goods, that treats people, that educates children. And he'll ask one question. Why aren't the other 30 counties doing the same? Haejin smiled wryly. She said it was a beautiful theory. But the emperor isn't just one person. It's the court. And at court, it's not the one who's right who decides, but the one with the most allies. Junho nodded. He said that was exactly why Haejin would travel to the capital. Tomorrow, with 3 copies of the report. One for Chancellor Moon Chang-ho, one for the senior censor, and one for the empress. Haejin fell silent. Then she asked how he knew about the empress.
Junho replied that the register had revealed something to him in the old documents. Empress Yun Hua-yeon, the daughter of an impoverished provincial family.
She married the heir when she was 16. 30 years at court. Quiet, unobtrusive. But she is the one who chooses which scrolls are placed on the emperor's desk each morning. And she was the one who, 3 years ago, wrote an anonymous decree stating that the widows of military personnel should receive a stipend from the treasury. The only social decree in Munson's 10-year reign. The empress was an ally no one sought, because no one considered a woman at court to be a force to be reckoned with. Junho did. Heijin looked at him. Then she said she knew the empress's lady-in-waiting personally, and that the report would reach her. She stood up, said she was leaving at dawn, and walked out. The fall of the second year brought 2 events at once. First, for the first time in a decade, Heian paid its full tax to the imperial treasury. Every coin, every drop. No delays, no padding. And in addition to the tax, Junho sent a petition to the capital. Not a request for help, a request to leave the surplus in the county to expand production. No magistrate in the history of the empire had ever asked for such a thing. Everyone had asked for money. Everyone had complained. They all begged. Junho asked for permission to keep the money he had earned himself. This threw the capital's officials for a loop. They didn't know how to react. The second event was even more terrifying. On the 271st day, the assassins arrived. Not mercenaries like last time. Professionals. The people of the shadows. That's what they were called. An assassins' guild that worked for the capital's conservative faction. 4 of them. They entered the city posing as merchants. Their documents were flawless. Their faces were ordinary. The registry hadn't seen them until one of them walked past Junho at the market. The lines lit up. Name unknown. Age approximately 35. Concealed weapons. 2 knives. A noose. Poison in a hollow ring on his left hand. Target, Magistrate Lee Junho. Secondary target, his wife. Junho stopped in the middle of the market. The world around him kept moving. People were trading, laughing and arguing. But he stood there, staring at the back of the man who had come to kill him. And for the first time, the ledger showed him what he didn't want to see.
Probability of a successful assassination attempt given the current security level, 61%. 61. More than half. 4 professionals against Kwon's 30 guards, who were good at dispersing gangsters, but not at hunting shadows. Junho returned to the district office, quietly, without giving anything away. He called for Mire. She arrived a minute later, always by his side, always on alert. He described the man from the market. Mire listened. Her expression didn't change. Then she said that 2 of her scouts had spotted strangers 2 days ago, 4 of them. They were staying at the inn by the south gate. They introduced themselves as silk merchants, but not a single one went to the market. Not a single one made a deal. They'd been holed up in the inn for 2 days, only going out in the evenings. She hadn't reported it because she wasn't sure. Now she was sure. Junho asked if she could stop them. Mire remained silent. Then she answered honestly. 1 or 2, yes. Not 4. The Shadow's men aren't village mercenaries. They're masters. Each is worth 10 ordinary fighters. Junho called Kwon and Dari. The 4 of them sat at the table. Junho, Mire, Kwon, and Dari. He explained. 4 assassins. The targets are him and Soyeon. The probability of success is more than 50%. Kwon turned pale. Not from fear, from anger. He said he'd station all 30 guards to protect the council building. Junho shook his head. He said that 30 guards around the council building would be an open invitation. The assassins would see the guards and realize they'd been exposed. They'd leave. They'd come back later, when the security is lax. No, something else is needed. They need to be lured there, to where he wants them to go, when he wants them to go. Dari leaned forward. Her eyes sparkled.
She asked what he had in mind. Junho took out a sheet of paper. He drew a floor plan of the administrative building. He pointed out his office, the bedroom, the courtyard and the gate, the roof. He said that tomorrow night he would be sleeping in his bedroom, alone, no guards at the door, just 2 guards at the main gate as usual. Mire began to object. Junho raised his hand. He said he would be in the bedroom, but not alone. Under the floor in the basement, which connects to his office, would be Kwon with his 5 best men. On the roof, in the shadow of the gutter, would be Dari with 3 of Mohi's archers.
Meyer and her men would block all the exits from the council building from the outside. When the assassins entered, they'd find themselves trapped. Meyer said it was madness, that he was using himself as bait. Junho replied that being bait was the only role he could play in battle. He didn't know how to wield a sword. He didn't know how to shoot a bow. He doesn't know how to fight. But he knows how to sit in a room and wait. That's his contribution. The night was quiet. Junho lay on a mat in the bedroom. He wasn't sleeping. He was listening. He'd sent So-yeon to In-hae at the hospital. He told her she needed to check the medicine supplies. So-yeon looked at him. She understood. She didn't argue. She took her shawl and left. At 2 in the morning, he heard a rustle, a faint one, like a mouse on paper. Then silence. Then the floorboards creaked by the door. Then the door slid open, soundlessly. In the moonlight, he saw a shadow, 1, then a second. 2 figures glided into the room. They moved the way water moves over stone, soundlessly, effortlessly. A knife glinted in the first one's hand. Junho lay motionless. His heart was pounding so hard he was sure they could hear it. The first shadow approached the mat. It raised the knife. At that moment, the floor beneath it gave way. Kwon Tae-soo and his 3 men struck from below through the trapdoor they had cut open that afternoon. The shadow fell. Kwon landed on top of it. The second shadow darted toward the window. She didn't make it. Dari's arrow pierced her shoulder. Through the window. From above. From the roof. The shadow fell. The third assassin was in the courtyard. Mire intercepted him by the wall. Her men subdued him in seconds. The fourth? The fourth was nowhere to be found. Mire searched the entire town hall, the whole courtyard, every alleyway. The fourth had vanished. He'd left. He'd realized it was a trap and fled. Junho sat on a mat waiting for his hands to stop shaking. 3 captives, 1 wounded, 1 unconscious, 1 tied up and silent. Kwon interrogated them all night. By dawn, the wounded man spoke. Hired through a middleman in the capital. The client. The conservative faction. Not just 1 person. A council of 5. Names. He knew 3 of the 5. 2 were just empty sounds to him. But Hae-jin, who by this time was already in the capital, would know them all. Junho wrote down the names. He put them in a folder. The folder was already thick, heavy, dangerous. It contained enough to send the provincial governor and 5 capital nobles to the scaffold, and enough to send Junho himself to the scaffold if the folder fell into the wrong hands. At dawn, So-yeon arrived. She saw the blood on the floor. They were tied up. Kwon with a gash across his forehead, an arrow stuck in the wall. She looked at Junho. He was waiting for her to cry or scream or say that this couldn't go on any longer. She walked over to him, took his hand, looked at his fingers. They were still trembling. She squeezed them tightly. Then she let go. She said breakfast would be ready in an hour, and that she'd brought some ointment for wounds from the hospital. For Kwon. She turned and walked to the kitchen.
Junho stood there watching her go, and he realized that this woman would never break. Not because she wasn't afraid, but because she'd decided not to break. That was stronger than any courage. On the 285th day, a letter arrived from Heijin in the capital. Short, cautious, written between the lines. The report reached the Chancellor. The Chancellor was impressed. The report reached the censor. The censor was interested. The report reached the Empress. The Empress read it in a single night. In the morning, she placed it on the Emperor's desk, with a bookmark on the page listing the 340 names. The Emperor read the list. All of it. Every name. Every cause of death. Then he asked one thing. Who is this Li Junho? Heijin wrote that she had been asked this question 3 times in a week, by different people, from different factions. Everyone wants to know who he is, where he's from, how. She wrote that Junho must come himself, in person. The Emperor wants to see him, not through intermediaries, not through reports, in person. And she added at the end that the conservatives had decided to stop him before he reached the palace. Junho packed his bags in a single day, not because he was in a hurry, because everything had been ready for a long time. He knew this day would come. From that first morning on the straw mat, when the blue lines of the Gazette first divided his world into numbers and destinies, everything led here, to the road to the capital. The day before his departure, he did something he had once during his entire time in Heian. He went to see So Dae-gyun, alone, without guards. The governor's residence stood in the provincial capital, a 2-day journey from Heian. Junho rode there on horseback, alone on the road. Kwon begged him to take at least 5 men. Junho refused. He said that 5 guards wouldn't save him from the governor if the governor wanted to kill him.
And if the governor didn't want to, then 5 would be superfluous. So Dae-gyung received him in the main hall, alone, also without any attendants. 2 armchairs, a table, a teapot. The governor was 53. He was heavy-set. His face was broad. His eyes were intelligent. His hands rested on his knees. He was calm. He poured tea, in silence. Junho sat down. He took a cup. They drank in silence for 2 minutes. Then So Dae-gyung spoke. He said he knew why the magistrate had come, that he knew about the audience, that he knew about the conservatives, that he knew Junho had to pass through the Mungyong Pass and that they were waiting for him there. Junho listened. Then he took a folder out of his bag. That very one, the heavy one. He placed it in front of the governor. So Dae-gyung looked at the folder. He didn't touch it. He knew what was inside, or at least he suspected. Junho spoke up. He said the folder contained a complete report on the Sir clan's activities over the past 30 years. Names, amounts, witnesses, testimony from mercenaries who had set fire to granaries on So Yong-il's orders, paid for by the governor. Reconstructed tax ledgers with evidence of embezzlement amounting to 14,000 sok of rice. The So-yong summary table, the Mun map, everything. So Dae-gyung remained silent. His expression didn't change, only the fingers on his knees clenched a little tighter. Junho continued. He said he wouldn't send this anywhere, not to the capital, not to the censors, not to the emperor. He would leave the folder with the governor. Let him do with it as he pleases. So Dae-gyung looked up. There was no fear in his eyes. There was surprise, genuine surprise. For the first time during the entire conversation, it was genuine. He asked why. Junho replied. He said he didn't need the governor's head. He needed a functioning Heian. If the governor fell, another just like him would take his place,
Or worse, the system won't change just because one man is executed. The system will change only if it's replaced with a new one, a better one. And for that, Jun-ho needs an audience, not revenge. So Dae-gyong was silent for a long time. Then he asked a second question. He asked what Jun-ho wanted for himself, personally. A position, a title, land, gold, what? Jun-ho replied that he wanted the 40,000 people in his county not to die of starvation in the winter. So Dae-gyong looked at him.
And Jun-ho saw in his eyes what he had seen through the knowledge, but what was now visible even without it.
Confusion. In 30 years of service, the governor had never met an official who had nothing to offer because that official wanted nothing for himself. This was the only variable that So Dae-gyong had not factored into his model. For 30 years, he had ruled people through greed and fear. Everyone could be bought, or intimidated, or compromised. Jun-ho did not yield to any of these levers, not because he was a saint. It was because his greed was directed elsewhere, toward rising graphs, toward falling mortality rates, at the faces of children eating porridge with meat. It was a kind of greed that So Dae-gyong didn't know how to harness. The governor placed his hand on the folder. He spoke a single sentence. He said that Jun-ho would be leaving tomorrow at dawn, via the Eastern Road, through the Mungyong Pass, and that he would not be alone at the pass. Jun-ho bowed. He stood up. He left. He rode back all night. At dawn the next day, he stood at the gates of the Heian administration. Everyone was there. Jongmye with 10 archers, their bows drawn, their quivers were full, their faces were calm. She stood at the head of her men and looked at Jun-ho without a smile. In a year and a half, she had gone from being a hostage and a poisoner to a commander who would stand between him and an arrow without hesitation. So-yeon stood by her horse, not in her house robe, in traveling clothes, with a bag of documents tied to the saddle. Jun-ho said she was staying in Heian. So-yeon replied that she wasn't. Her voice was steady and final. She said that if he were killed on the road, the documents had to be with him. And she was the documents. Because Yuna remembers the numbers, but So-yeon remembers the system. And if they had to speak with the emperor about how Heian works, she was the one who should do the talking, because she knows it better than he does himself. She knows every coin, every line, every arrow. Jun-ho looked at her. Then he nodded. In-hye appeared at the gate as if by chance, with a medical bag. She said she was going to the capital on her own business. She'd been planning it for a long time. A coincidence. No one believed her. No one said a word. Hae-jin was already in the capital and was already making her moves. Through her contacts, through the lady-in-waiting, through people she'd known for 20 years.
3 of her men had gone ahead 2 days earlier. They were scouting the route, marking dangerous spots, sending reports back. Yundari sent word at dawn. The mountain trails above the Mungyong Pass are occupied by Mohe warriors, 40 horsemen, her personal unit. They can see the pass from above, every rock, every tree, every shadow. If anyone is waiting below, the Mohi will spot them before they spot the caravan. Park Dong-soo stood at the gate and wept, just like on the first day. Only on the first day he wept out of fear. Now it was for something else. Jun-ho walked up to him. He put a hand on his shoulder. He said he'd be back. Park nodded. He didn't believe him, but he nodded. Yuna stood next to her father. She wasn't crying. She was holding a scroll in her hands. She handed it to Jun-ho. She said it was a complete summary of all the county's income and expenses over the past 2 years.
Every figure had been checked 3 times. If the emperor needed proof, here it was. Junho took the scroll. He looked at Yuna. He said quietly that she understood what she had just done, that this scroll was an indictment of 3 consecutive governors. Yuna replied that she understood, and that was precisely why she had rewritten it in her best handwriting. The caravan set out at dawn. Junho, Soyeon, Mirei with 10 archers, Inhe, 20 of Kwon's guards. Kwon himself did not go. He remained in Heian. Someone had to hold the county while the magistrate was away. Kwon accepted this task without a word. He simply nodded, stood at the gate, and watched as the caravan headed down the eastern road. 3 days to the pass. The road wound through the hills, past coal mines, past villages where people came out to the roadside to watch. Some bowed. Some just stood there. A boy from the village of Nampo ran out to the road and held out a baked sweet potato to Junho, wrapped in a clean cloth, still hot. Junho took it. He thanked him. He rode on, holding the sweet potato in his hand, a crop that no one in this county had known a year ago, but which children were now bringing to the magistrate as a gift. On the 3rd day, they climbed up to the Mungyong Pass, a narrow gorge between 2 cliffs. The road narrowed to the width of a single cart, the perfect spot for an ambush. Mirei stopped the scout. She sent 2 men ahead. They returned an hour later. There were people up ahead, 20 of them, armed, waiting. Junho asked, "An ambush?" Mirei nodded. Then she added, "But that's not all. There are more people higher up the slope. Others. Mounted men, with the So clan's banners."
So Daegyeon had kept his word. His detachment was stationed on the slope above the pass, not to help the assassins, but to cover the magistrate. Mirei looked at Junho and asked what to do. Junho replied with a single word: "Forward." The battle at the pass was brief. 20 assassins against Mirei's 10 archers, 20 guards, and 40 Mohi horsemen who attacked from above along the trails they'd known since childhood, and So Daegyeon's detachment, which sealed off the gorge from the rear. The assassins hadn't expected an attack from 3 sides. The battle lasted less than an hour. Junho didn't raise his weapon. He stood by the rock, holding Soyeon's hand. She stared at the blood and didn't look away. Her hand was cold. Her fingers clenched his so tightly that his knuckles turned white. But she stood her ground. Inhe was already among the wounded, bandaging and cleaning their wounds. Rice wine from a flask on her belt, clean rags from her bag. She was saving everyone, friends and strangers alike. Because to a doctor, there are no strangers. When it was all over, Junho climbed to the top of the pass. Below lay the Heian Valley. In the setting sun, the tiled roofs of the workshops were visible. Wispy smoke rose above the communal kitchens. A long white ribbon of the canal. Fields. Green. Alive. Terraces of sweet potatoes on the slopes. Dark squares of buckwheat. And houses. The new houses of Mohi in the valley below the pass, with their gently sloping roofs shielding them from the wind. Soyeon stood beside him. She said quietly that he had built all this in 2 years. Junho looked out at the valley, at the city that was destined to die, at the 40,000 people who lived, ate, worked, studied, and gave birth to children. At the school where Batar, a boy from a mountain tribe, wrote hieroglyphs with a hand accustomed to a bowstring. At the hospital where a blacksmith dressed wounds more skillfully than any doctor. At the market where a former kisen set fair prices. At the office where the old caretaker's daughter remembered every number. He replied not as a magistrate, as a human being. He said that they had built it,
and that now they would travel to the capital and build more. The caravan descended from the pass and headed south, toward the capital, toward the emperor, toward a future that Junho could not foresee but did not fear, because Soyeon's bag contained numbers, and every number was true.
The capital greeted them with rain, the first in 3 years. Water poured from the sky as if heaven had decided to repay everything it owed for the years of drought. Junho stood in the rain at the main gate and looked at the city he was seeing for the first time through the eyes of this body. Hanyang, the capital of the Taewa Empire. Stone walls, the tiled roofs of the palaces, thousands of people. The ledger hummed, thousands of lines, thousands of faces, thousands of secrets. He shut it out with an act of will. Not now. Hae-jin met them at the guest quarters. Her face was calm. She was dressed in the style of the capital. She had once again become the woman she once was, a woman who knows every corridor of the palace and every twist of court intrigue. She said the audience was scheduled for the day after tomorrow, that Chancellor Moon Chang-ho would receive Junho tomorrow, unofficially over dinner, that the senior censor would be at the audience and would ask 3 questions that Hae-jin already knew, that the conservatives had lost 20 assassins at the pass and were now looking for another way, not force, but the law. They would challenge the magistrate's authority right there at the audience. They would bring everything up. A woman in office, mountain savages in the city, violations by the trade guilds, the destruction of the clan order. Junho listened. He nodded. Then he asked one thing. Had Hae-jin seen the emperor? Hae-jin replied that she had not, but she had seen the empress, through a lady-in-waiting, a 5-minute conversation through a screen. The empress asked only one thing. Was it true that in Heian, not a single child under the age of 5 had died that winter? Hae-jin replied that it was true. The empress was silent for a moment. Then she said from behind the screen that she was waiting for the magistrate. That evening, Junho had dinner with Chancellor Moon Chan-ho. A small room, a low table, a simple meal. The Chancellor turned out to be a short, thin man with quick eyes, 62 years old. His record showed that. Honest, relative speaking, by the capital standards. His personal fortune was modest. He belonged to the reformist faction. 12 supporters on the council, 6 at court. Not many against 28 conservatives. But the Chancellor was in it for the long haul. The Chancellor didn't ask about the numbers. He read the report. He knew everything. He asked something else. He asked what Junho would tell the emperor.
Junho replied. He would tell the truth. The Chancellor smiled. He said that the truth at court was a luxury few could afford. Junho replied that his truth was backed by numbers. And numbers aren't a luxury. Numbers are a weapon. The Chancellor stopped smiling. He looked at Junho for a long time. Then he nodded. He said that tomorrow Junho would speak for himself. The Chancellor wouldn't speak on his behalf. He wouldn't defend him. Not because he didn't want to, but because any defense from the Chancellor would be perceived as a factional maneuver. Junho must stand alone, just as he did in Heian. Alone with his numbers before people who do not believe in numbers. Junho returned to the courtyard. Soyeon was waiting for him. She was sitting at the table. All 12 scrolls lay before her. She was rereading them one last time, checking every number, every line. Junho sat down beside her. They worked until dawn, in silence, shoulder to shoulder, 2 people who measured the world in numbers. The morning of the audience, the palace. Junho walked across the stone slabs in the ceremonial robe that Hae-jin had found somewhere overnight. Clean, new, with the magistrate's seal on the sash.
Soyeon walked 3 steps behind. In-hye was beside her. Mire stayed at the palace gates with the archers. They weren't allowed into the palace. Mire stood by the wall and stared at the gates as if she could pierce them with her gaze. The throne room was enormous. The ceiling was lost in the shadows. The columns were red and gold. The floor was stone, cold. The emperor sat on a dais, far away. His face was barely visible. Nearby, to the left, behind a screen adorned with cranes, a shadow, the empress. Advisers stood on both sides of the hall. On the right, Chancellor Moon Chang-ho and his 12. On the left, the conservatives. There were more of them. Jun-ho walked through the hall, and the register displayed each one. Names, titles, incomes, hidden debts, secret connections. He closed the register. He didn't need it. Right now, he had no use for other people's secrets. He needed his own truth. He bowed to the emperor, at exactly the prescribed angle. He knelt down. His forehead touched the stone. He rose. The emperor spoke. His voice was even, distant. He asked who stood before him. Jun-ho replied, Lee Jun-ho, Magistrate of Haean County, Sogyeong Province. The emperor asked why a magistrate from a distant county was standing before the throne.
Jun-ho replied that he had brought a report. The emperor said he had read the report, and that he did not want to hear numbers. He wanted to hear from the man himself. At that moment, a counselor rose from the left. An old man, grey-haired. His voice was sharp. The leader of the conservatives. He said that before listening to the magistrate, the court must consider a petition from 30 loyal servants of the empire who accuse Lee Jun-ho of violating the statutes and undermining the foundations. Jun-ho had been expecting this. He turned to the counselor. He said gently that he was ready to answer every accusation, one by one. But first, he asked the emperor's permission to pose a single question to those who had signed the petition. The emperor nodded. Jun-ho asked, of the 30 signatories, how many had ever even set foot in Haean County? Silence. No one answered. Because the answer was 0. Not a single one of the 30 had ever seen Haean. They had signed a petition against a county they knew only from the denunciations of Seo Yong-il. Jun-ho turned to the emperor. He said he hadn't brought a piece of paper. He had brought witnesses. The emperor raised an eyebrow. Jun-ho turned toward the doors. He nodded. The doors opened. Soyeon entered. Behind her was In-hye, and behind them 8 people whom Hae-jin had brought to the capital a week before the caravan arrived. Quietly, unobtrusively, one by one. An elderly peasant woman, one of those who had been the first to place a carrot on the altar on the Day of Remembrance. Blacksmith Che Do-yun, whose hands that healed people. Kim Chang-soo, a former rebel and now the head of the paper cooperative. Oh Soo-jin, a widow whom the fund had ransomed from bondage. Batar, a boy from the Mohi tribe who wrote hieroglyphs better than the capital's students. His mother, a foreman from the canal, and the widow of the former magistrate, the very one who had turned Yoon away at the doorstep 7 times. She had come. 8 people stood in the throne room and looked at the emperor, not on their knees, standing, because Jun-ho had asked them to stand. He told the emperor that these people were his report, alive. An old peasant woman had survived the winter in which, by all accounts, she should have died. The blacksmith had become a doctor. The rebel had become a master craftsman. The slave girl had become free. The boy from the mountain tribe had become a student. The widow of the magistrate who had hanged himself out of despair stood and looked at the people her husband had been unable to save, while the young commoner magistrate from the common was able to. The throne room was silent. The conservatives were silent.
The Chancellor was silent. The Emperor was silent. Then a voice rang out from behind the screen adorned with cranes. Quiet. A woman's voice. The Empress asked one thing. She asked if it were true that not a single child under the age of 5 had died in Heian all winter. Junho turned toward the screen. He replied that 7 had died. 2 from an illness they could not overcome even with treatment. 5 from congenital weaknesses he could do nothing about. Their names were in the report, on page 214. He remembered each one. He named them. 7 names. 7 children he had failed to save. It was so quiet in the throne room that Junho could hear the rain dripping outside the windows. Then the Emperor spoke. He said he had read the report. He said he hadn't believed it until he saw the people for himself. He said he wanted to know one thing. Could what had been done in Heian be done in other counties? Junho replied. He said it could be done. Not quickly, not easily, but it could be done. To achieve this, 3 things were needed. First, civil service exams should test not knowledge of the classics, but the ability to calculate and govern. Second, county budgets must be transparent. Every coin must be accounted for. Every expense must be justified. Every report must be audited. Third, officials must be rotated, not once per generation, every 3 years. Rotation, so that no clan takes root in a county like a tree in the ground. The Conservatives began to murmur. 2 of them jumped to their feet. They started shouting that this was madness, that it would destroy the empire, that without the clans the provinces would collapse. The Emperor raised his hand. Silence returned instantly. He said he'd heard enough, that he would make a decision, that Magistrate Heian could return to his duties. The audience was over. Junho bowed. He turned around. He walked toward the exit. Soyeon walked beside him, not behind him, beside him. For the first time in 2 years, shoulder to shoulder, across the palace's stone slabs, past the red columns, past the silent advisers, toward the doors. Mireille stood at the doors, with a bow on her back. She looked at them. She nodded. They left the palace.
The rain hadn't stopped. Warm, spring rain. The first in 3 years. The Gyeonggin drought was over. The 4 of them stood on the palace steps. Junho, Soyeon, Inhae, and Mide. The rain pounded the stone steps and streamed down the plaza, washing away the dust of 3 dry years. Soyeon turned her face toward the rain. She closed her eyes. Drops ran down her cheeks and she smiled. Junho stood beside her, thinking that in a week they would return to Heian, and that in a month summer would arrive, and that the fields along the canal would fill with water, and that the sweet potatoes on the terraces would yield a second harvest, and that Yuna would finish compiling the registry, and that Che Do-yun would learn to stitch up the wounds that used to be fatal, and that Dari would bring more families, and the mountain children would attend school, and that Heijin would find new trade routes, and that Kwon would grumble and obey and grumble again, and that Park Dong-soo would cry at every piece of good news, and that the Emperor may accept his proposal, or may not, and that the Conservatives will send new assassins, or may not, and that the Register will one day show him who he is, why he was transported here, and what kind of celestial official ruled Heian 300 years ago, or may not. All of this lay ahead. But for now, it was raining. And Soyeon stood beside him, her face wet and her fingers stained with ink. And somewhere far away in the valley beyond the mountains and passes lay a small county that wasn't supposed to survive. But it did.
because one man knew how to count, and because he was surrounded by people for whom it was worth counting. Jun-ho descended the palace steps and walked across the wet plaza toward the courtyard. His team followed behind him. His family, his army, his numbers. The rain didn't stop, and that was a good thing, because the drought was over, and he was just getting started.